Good evening, everyone. We're going to start, please. If everybody could please take a seat. Welcome, everybody, to the Town of Somers Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. The date is October 16th, 2018. Denise, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Mr. Carpenetto?
Here.
Ms. DiPolito?
Here.
Mr. Gio?
Here.
Mr. Harding?
Here.
Mr. Newman?
Here.
Mr. Santoroni?
Here.
Chairman Canestra?
Here.
Thank you.
I request everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Before the meeting begins, I have two items just to mention. Item 2 on the agenda this evening, that of Carol Miller for a special exception use permit at the request of the applicant, that has been adjourned to next month's meeting, so that we will not hear that item this evening. Second item I will make mention of, the matter of Anthony and Catherine Porco has also been carried over to next month's meeting. This was a decision that the board made, and I will explain that. This item has been carried over for several months and we were stayed making any decision or discussion on it while the New York State Supreme Court was reviewing the application, was reviewing whether we had jurisdiction, I should say, to hear this matter. The court has determined that we do have jurisdiction to hear the matter, so we will. However, this decision only came down last week, and this has provided us extremely short notice to review all the documents. We haven't reviewed these documents for several months, and they're probably a good 8 inches thick, so I want the board to refamiliarize themselves with all of the relevant details. Additionally, I want to give adequate time to the Porcos and to Mr. Cuck of Whispering Pines and any individuals that they would like to have come and speak in regard to this matter. I want to give everybody adequate time to prepare and come, because we do want to hear everybody in regard to this issue. Additionally, the longtime building inspector for the town of Somers retired as of September 30th, so we have a new building inspector. And I don't think it's fair to him that we dump 8 to 10 inches worth of documents and have him go through it and try to come up with some advice for us and some other answer other questions we might have. So for all of those reasons, I've made the decision as the chairman of the zoning board to carry over the item to next month's meeting. That being said, we're going to go to item 1 on the agenda, that of Wilderness Crossing LLC. If someone is here for the applicant, sir, if you could please come up. If you could please give us your name and briefly describe your application before us.
Yes, Lou DeLeo. I'm the principal of Studio Rye Architects, and we're here for variance on signage, the size of the signs and the number of signs for the new DiCicco's supermarket. This is a site plan showing the different locations of signs that we're proposing. There's various fronts to the building, so each one of these boxes represents a sign, plus a driving in and out sign in this section of the building.
Freestanding sign.
Freestanding sign,
Yes.
Right. So the one variance is for the size of the sign, which is really not the letters themselves, but that's the DiCicco's and Sun sign. And the variance is for the bag. The bag is bigger than the required height.
The height, right.
Okay. The freestanding sign, it's made out of timber, carved letters, and it's lit from the bottom. All the other signs are individual letters attached to the building, and they're backlit. And that's the variance we're seeking.
They're solid letters or will they glow?
Excuse me?
They're solid letters?
They're solid letters, yeah.
So they're lit, it looks like there's lights above them,
Yes. Yes.
right, hanging lights above them.
Hanging lights above.
How about the two DeChico signs that are on the clock tower?
There are also individual letters attached to it. There's a steel bar behind them. They're not lit.
They're not lit.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Is this signage standard for most DeChicos?
Yes.
I would make mention also that the Architectural Review Board has reviewed these signs as to color proposed, and they referred this matter to us because they're not allowed to approve the number of signs and give variances to the code. And I'll quote from the letter, although the board did not object to the design and colors of the signs proposed, they couldn't be approved as the Chico's and Sons signs are, 11.14 inches higher in the center where the shopping bag is part of the logo. In addition, the applicant is only permitted to have 2 signs as per the code, and the proposal is for a total of 6. Right? 3 on the
That's-
building, 2 on the clock tower, and 1 freestanding.
That's right.
Right, okay. Any other questions of the applicant from the board?
Did you consider making the shopping bag smaller and removing that issue?
Mr. DeChico?
Good evening, John DeChico. Yeah, we did consider making the shopping bag logo, but bag smaller. But when we do that, it kind of crushes the entire logo and it looks disproportional. So generally, in the past, what we've done, we've always made the bag look a little bit bigger.
Now, the sign that's out on 202, what is the overall length and height of that sign, please?
All 3 signs on the 3 building facades are all the same size and same heights.
Correct.
So, yep. So the one on that is a total of 19 feet 11 inches, and the total height. The letters are 24 inches, but the bag is a max of I think 36 inches total to the top of the bag.
All right, now, I will say that with the signage, with the grand total of 6 signs, I personally have a problem with the total of 6 signs. I strongly would like to sort of like compromise of allowing to have the bag being the height that it is and the length of the sign, and the signs underneath the clock tower to be redesigned or removed. Because again, it's way too much above the code.
The building is unique in that it's freestanding, basically. So it has multiple facades. It doesn't just have one entrance. It's approached to many different areas, from the shopping center, from Route 202, from the side streets, and and there's basically 3 major signs that are the 19 feet.
No, listen, I realize what you're saying.
Yeah.
The signs are very big, okay? Now, I can see if the corner of the building had a much longer parking lot, okay, where the parking lot was as big as, say, from Somerstown Shopping Center to walk into the clock tower, I can more or less go along with that. Because now you're talking with a short distance. You're having people walking in off a very short distance of parking. Their eyes are not going to be on the building to walk in. Their eyes are going to be on traffic. So that's another reason why I'm saying, I'm not in favor of those 2 signs. It's more so a distraction in a sense of safety.
Again, there's 3 19-foot signs. The
Right.
one on the clock tower is barely 9 feet long, and it's so light and open, it's almost not visible. It's just.
Sir, I'm sorry. Can you get the mic?
Okay?
The large signs, again, there's only 3 large signs, 3 19-foot signs. The sign in the clock tower is very, very small. It's about 9 feet big, width. It works with the height. There's not a problem with the height. And it's so light and airy that it's not really, as big as the other sign. There's more of a sculptural element.
Again, I feel it's way overkill for signage. It's my personal opinion. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but that's where I stand on that.
When I look at this application, the building is very large, so I think it is conducive to more signs. I think the signs are not that obtrusive. To me, I don't have a problem with it. I'm disagreeing a little bit with my co-board member here. I think they're tastefully done. You know, I like seeing the letters as opposed, I believe, to a light box, you know, or something like that, which I think is not that attractive. So I have a little bit of a different opinion. That I think because the property is so large, because the building is so large, and the signs are, you know, tastefully done, I think I might be more inclined to approve it, but.
No, I'm sorry. Please do not get me wrong. As the chair mentioned, the signs are very tastefully done, okay? You have a wall, okay? Say, for instance, that would be on the east side, okay? Going towards the professional building at Somerstown Shopping Center. Yes, I would like to see that particular sign there. Again, it's done in graceful, in taste. I'm not saying it's not done in taste. That would definitely make the building more attractive. So I do not want you to think that I'm totally against the signs. I'm just against the ones on the clock tower.
My concern is this standalone sign that you have. It seems to me that you dropped that sign in there as an afterthought. The signs on the building, I think, are just as Cliff does. They're very well designed, they're well proportioned, they meet the building, they do the job. If I could see a lot of walking traffic around, I'd understand why you have that sign there. But I don't expect to have much walking traffic. I think all your traffic will be people coming in cars.
That's true, but we are rebuilding quite a large expanse of sidewalks to attract people to walk in that area. And the sign, the freestanding sign it's created in its size to a human scale. And it's wood, and it has a trellis over it. So it's more of a garden element than a loud sign that says entrance. And it is a pedestrian approach. You see it when you come out of Heritage Hills. You see it as you drive by, and if you're slow enough. And definitely, it's made for a pedestrian eye-level sign.
Right.
But it's very small, and it's natural wood. It's not metal. It's not, it will blend in with the.
Where do
with
you
the architecture.
expect to attract these walkers from?
I don't know. They made us do a couple of 1,000 feet of sidewalks, so hopefully they'll be fine. If I could approach, I have a copy of what the actual sign looks like. Would you like to see that? We've done this before.
Well, after they walk to the Chico's and get their packages, are they going to be walking home or back to school or something? I'm
We
not
encourage
sure.
that. It's a very healthy thing to do.
Can you clarify the location of the freestanding sign? Is that in the entryway to the parking lot?
It looks like in that little median there, right?
Yeah, that sign actually that sign's been on the plans from day one, from the get-go, through the planning board on the initial application. So that particular sign is on the median, directly across from Heritage Hills median.
Exactly what
Okay.
Does that block traffic at that point?
Sorry?
Does that block traffic?
Was it blocked?
Site-
No.
It's set back enough that it doesn't go away.
I know I've seen that sign someplace else. This is the Mount Kisco Diner sign.
Yeah.
Oh, son of a gun. Yeah, there you go.
The question is, but did you walk there?
People do walk by it enough.
Well, there's walking in Mount Kisco, yeah.
You can see it has a trellis on top of it, so it's sort of, it talks about growing things, flowers, it's a garden.
It's a very natural looking kind of.
They're all well done, there's no question about it.
I won't say Mount Kisco Dynamo.
Right. Any other comments from the board before I go to the public?
Just one more question. You mentioned, so these are externally lit from above.
Yes.
Did you say glow? Was it?
No, they stand out from the building.
Okay.
They
Yeah,
never-
they're
no
unlit.
lighting behind them.
They're unlit. They're all unlit signs. Yeah.
There's like little lights that hang above the
Yes,
main
the
signs.
gooseneck lights,
That
yeah.
kind of
Yes.
go down, right?
And are there any lights up in the clock towers?
Only in the ceiling itself.
There'll probably be some type of pendant light up there or recessed lights. We haven't figured that out yet, but
Nothing on the sign itself.
That's the last thing to go up on the building.
Right. Okay. All right, I'll give you another opportunity to come back up. First, I'd like to hear if there's anybody in the
Okay,
audience
thanks.
who wishes to speak in regard to this. Does anybody here wish to speak in regard to this application? Any comments, concerns from anybody? Questions? No? How about the board? Any other discussion we want to have? Any other questions of the applicant? Denise, you can confirm, as the memo indicates here, that this went before the Architectural Review Board.
Correct, and they were very pleased with the application.
They were satisfied with it? Okay. I mean, Architectural Review Board, I know, does try to, make decisions, of course, that are in conformance with,
I think
what's in
that,
town.
yeah. We need the signage to be that size, that size of building.
Yeah. The building's big, I mean, but everybody, got to be 4 votes one way or another.
I don't see any problems with it.
I need
So,
Any more discussion to be had or proposals to be made? Any other questions anyone has?
no.
You prepared to go for a vote?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion for the type of action.
I'd like to make the motion be type 2.
Second.
Mr. Carpenetto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Gio?
Aye.
Mr. Harden?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Mr. Santorani?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have a motion as to whether we're going to accept the application or deny it, or
Okay.
accept it with modifications.
I'll make a motion that the application is accepted as shown here tonight on these plans.
Second.
Mr. Carpenetto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Gio?
Denied.
Mr. Harden?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Mr. Santorani?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations, your application is granted. Yep, thank you.
Do you need this signed out?
Good night.
Good night.
No, it's not. Do you want your photograph back of the sign, sir? For your next meeting. It was nice, yes. Thank you. The next item on the agenda this evening is also the last item we'll hear tonight, that of Kayla Choquette and David Potter. I'm sorry if I'm getting the names wrong. This is an application for a special exception use permit to construct an accessory apartment on the second floor of a barn, as well as an area variance because the barn is being constructed after April 1, 1992, located in an R80 district. Is someone here to speak for the applicant? Sure, absolutely. Just come up and give us your name, and if you could just briefly describe your application for us.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Sure, just, if you speak into the mic, it'll be fine.
I'm Kayla Choquette. I'm the new owner of 6 Anarock Drive. I'm here tonight with my grandfather, David Potter, who's the co-owner of the property with me and who will be living there with us. My partner, Daniel Gefazman, our general contractor, Justin Leege, and our engineer, Tim Allen of Bibbo and Associates. We have submitted an application for an area variance and special use permit to construct an accessory apartment in a barn we are building at the property. This apartment will be for my mother. We believe the barn is the best place for the apartment because there's no logical place within the home to place it, and putting it above the barn will make it effectively invisible from the road. As I mentioned before, my grandfather will be living in the home with us, so therefore we thought having another family member in a separate building would make the most sense and preserve the appearance of the home as a single family dwelling. I'd like to address some of the issues presented by my neighbors at last month's meeting. Manure disposal and pest management are basic practices addressed at any farm situation. As stated in the Somers Town Code and as described on the engineering plans we've submitted, we have a designated site for a manure dumpster.
Yeah, excuse me, Matt, I'm going to interrupt you just for a moment. And maybe this really, everybody should hear very clearly. The application before us this evening is for the special exception use permit, okay? It's going, for this barn. In regard to the barn itself, its construction, in regard to having horses on the property, the barn won't be constructed until a permit is issued for the barn, and if we make a decision that an accessory apartment is allowed in the barn, then that would of course be contingent upon the permit for the barn itself, which has not been issued yet. So I know that we have received a voluminous amount of material regarding the keeping of horses, the barn itself, and I think that the barn itself and the horses will either be a matter of right that the applicant is allowed to do it, or they can't. So to discuss something that is not before the board, that whether this board loves the horses and barns or dislikes them is irrelevant. The only issue before us this evening is that of the special exception use permit. And there are two parts of that permit. One is that a special exception use permit is an as of right, meaning that you can have it if you meet the certain criteria in the code, you are allowed to have it. This application has an extra hurdle to cross because the code requires that the building be built before April 1st, 1992. So since this building will be constructed, it is of course after that date, so an area variance has to be obtained for it. So that's something that the board can condition and approve it or not. So, and I understand the issue with the horses and things, and if you are allowed to have horses, the code lays out very clearly that, their waste, everything has to be managed properly, and there's a lot of rules and regulations regarding that.
Yeah.
So we are aware of that.
Okay.
Okay, so, any discussion really, and, because at last month's meeting, we heard a lot of discussion. We were supposed to only talk about the special exception use permit, and we get into the horses and the barn. It is not a matter before us, so only want to talk about the special exception use permit.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
Okay?
I mean,
Okay.
there's not much to say. I know there's been some concerns raised about living near and around horses with ventilation issues.
Right.
I'm an equine veterinarian, so I'm ambulatory, which means I drive to the horses at their farms in the surrounding area. I know of at least 20 barns that have apartments above them. I know the people that live in the apartments very, very well because these are the people involved with the day-to-day care. And I myself, in veterinary school, lived on a farm with 36 horses, and for the past 4.5 years have lived on the farm with my horses and didn't have any health issues because of the horses.
My experience has been, from what I know of my clients and other people, that I do see that there is a lot of living accommodations above barns.
Yes.
I do see that as a common practice.
Yeah, I have a couple real estate handouts that I actually just found today at a local coffee shop, that there's 5 barns in the surrounding areas that list on the real estate, that they've had apartments above them. I know I have a client just over in Walkabuck that built her actual home above her barn in the last 5 years. I know it's not Somers, but I want everyone to know, I know the horse world is sort of weird and not everyone's familiar with it, but we're not reinventing the wheel. This is something that is super normal, and there's Board of Health regulations to manage the fire risk and the ventilation, and all of this is, we've tried to do everything correct with hiring the engineers and applying for the Board of Health approval and everything. It's my own mother, and I know in the past there was, an allowance for a family member to have an apartment in a newer structure, and if you guys want me to say it has to be a blood relative, I'm more than happy. It's literally so my mom can come here, so when we have children, she can help raise them, and I can go back to work.
Because of the date after 1992, let me just ask you this question. Would you be amicable to, if we restricted the use of the apartment, assuming the apartment's approved, to non-rentals, meaning that you don't rent it out, that it only is for people who might take care of the horses or a family member and not anyone you would rent out to?
Yeah, we've applied.
If we put that condition upon you,
Yep.
would that be something that you would be willing to comply with?
Yes. Yeah, we applied with NICEAG for the electrical line. I said, just make it 1 meter. I mean, we're paying the bill for it. It doesn't, we don't, we have no indication to get rental income.
Okay, I'm just curious,
Yeah.
because, when you bring renters in, it's a little bit of a different
Completely different, yeah.
situation.
No, I mean, I own my own practice. I'm a small business owner. So I'm just assuming as we get to the point of having children, I'm not going to be able to have an extended maternity leave. So having your mom there to take care of your tiny baby so you can go back to work is kind of an ideal situation for childcare, especially in this area where it's so expensive. So, we've been looking for 3.5 years for a property that we could do this. That's why we've been renting. I've been renting in Brewster for so long because I had the horses on site. And we've been looking for a place that could fit all of us because this has been our goal, just for a family.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant at this point in time?
I do not.
Okay. If you could just have a seat, I want to go to the audience and see if any comments or questions regarding the accessory apartment. Anybody like to speak in regard to this application? Here again, I'm please going to request that the comments be related to the accessory apartment application, not be whether the barn structure should be built, and not in regard to whether horses should be on the property, because that's not before us. Sir, if you just give your name.
Good evening. Michael Caruso. I represent Barlow and Patricia Humphreys and George Azar. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the applicants. So the board has before it my memorandum and some submissions that were made today. I realize there's a lot of material floating out there, so I'm going to go straight to the legal issues. I think there's some threshold legal issues that need to be dealt with. The board is deciding, my understanding is that there's an area variance component, as well as deciding the special exception use permit, if I'm not mistaken. I tried to lay that out in my memo, and I know most of you just received it. But there's a couple issues that, again, are threshold that need to be addressed. And the first, unfortunately, is the jurisdiction of the zoning board to, if you will, decide an area variance on a time limitation in your code. And the problem is that a zoning board is fundamentally unable to vary a time requirement. Area variances impart bulk, scale, dimension, physical limitations that affect property and the use of property. A limitation in time, April 1st, 1992, under 170-70B of the code, which prohibits the accessory structure potentially. It's a uniquely legislative issue that the town board put in the code. And if it were to be varied, the town board would be the only body that could amend or change that law. It's not able to be varied in the sense of a physical dimension, like, side yard setbacks, height, floor area ratio, and the things that come before the board that are properly area variances. So that's number one. Number two is that there are accessory uses that are flatly prohibited by the code. And this is something that the board must look at, the use that's contemplated by the barn, which will have animals in them, regardless of whether they're horses or not. The code says that you can't have an accessory apartment where there are keeping in domestic animals. The two uses are not compatible. The code flatly prohibits it. You have to consider that issue regardless of whatever else is in the application. So that's plain and clear in the code. The third point is, and again, I'm summarizing, you have a pretty extensive memo. I don't want to take a lot of airtime away from the other members of the public. The other thing is that the planning board, with all respect to this board, of course, the planning board is the appropriate body for deciding whether the special exception use permit should be granted. And there's reasons why, which is really, I think, the uses and the enlargements that accompany what would come with this special exception use permit. Keeping animals, treating manure or whatever comes with them, where the animals go, where they're kept, where they're maintained, and all these areas. Excuse me. Those are site plan issues, and that goes to environmental significance. That goes to SECRA, and those are all issues that are delegated exclusively to the planning board. And that's even further driven home by the fact that part of this property is in a groundwater protection overlay district, which mandates certain submissions that haven't been made, a hydrogeological study being one of them. So if the board were to consider first the area variance criteria, assuming that applies, which again, I think is very clear that this is not something that can be the subject of an area variance, a limitation in time, all of the factors that would support an area variance, none of them can be met here, unfortunately. And that requires, and Mr. Chairman, let me know if you want me to go into this further or not, that requires considering the attendant uses for the barn, the horses, keeping the horses, the manure, treatment and disposal of solid wastes, and all those practices. So when you look at all those conditions in assessing whether an area variance is appropriate here, you'll read in the brief, and I can go through them at length if you like, but I'd rather just keep it brief right now, that none of those criterion can be established. There are intensified environmental issues here. There are substantiality issues. The character of the neighborhood, which we know is more of a monolith in residential character, and all of these factors don't support placing these uses here, unfortunately. Likewise, under the use variance analysis, if the board were to apply the use variance analysis here, saying that, for example, the use of this structure after 1992 could be varied, it could be relaxed, if you will, that standard's even higher. So that standard can't even be met if the area variance standard can't be met. And finally, when you go to your criterion for granting a special exception use, again, which is assuming that the board has the jurisdiction to entertain the application and not the planning board, the standards that the board has to run through, the non-exhaustive list, have the same factors that I just reviewed and summarized. All of the environmental impacts, all of the characteristics of the neighborhood, which are starkly different from what's being proposed, in addition to the goals of the comprehensive plan, which this board has to take into account. And nowhere in that plan does it say that residential districts are to be developed in a manner that promotes mixed uses of this type or more intense uses of this type, or would change fundamentally the nature of this neighborhood, if you will. So those are the factors legally, and hopefully I haven't put you completely to sleep, but I did bring a little bit of a visual aid just to run through some of the factors and how they impact my clients who live next to the property, if the board will indulge me for another couple minutes.
Is your discussion going to be limited to the special exception use permit for the
Yeah,
apartment?
you can't throw I keep saying this, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In order to discuss that application, you have to discuss the attendant factors, the environmental impacts on my clients.
You're assuming, though, that this is a use variance, not an area variance, under that criteria?
I think under either criterion, the board will still have to assess these factors, which I'll go into in a minute. So provided that's acceptable, I'd like to just explore them.
Okay, you can go ahead, but, please, if we could keep it brief somewhat.
Very brief. Okay. Does everybody see that? Okay, so you have some photographs that I provided in the packet, and I can take you through them briefly. So what you're looking at is what's known as lot, I think, 5 and lot 8. This is the premises, the applicant's property. This was I think this is the existing dwelling, proposed barn. So I represent Barlow and Patricia Humphreys, who live here, and George Azar, who lives here. If you look at the photos I provided, the first one shows the residence looking north this way, and you can see a pretty big depression here. And that's the front yard where I believe their septic fields, as indicates here, but there's a pretty large punch bowl, if you will, right here where my hand is. And as you flip through the photographs, you'll notice 2 or 3 in, there's a trench. And the trench that you're seeing actually runs north-south right here. And that, I believe, is in a sewer or a stormwater easement that the town maintains. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is anything that's generated on this site or up here where the grade is extremely steep, if there are changes in, for example, if there's a corral or a paddock or a riding area, or if the surface is being changed by animals and the surface water retention qualities are being changed, all of that flow is going to go into this punch bowl where Mr. Azar's property is, more so than the Humphreys property, but also where this equipment is, this trenching that you're seeing here. So what I'm getting at is the phosphorus, the nitrates, and all the enhancements, if you will, from animal byproducts, from manure, from urine, that will flow downhill. And downhill is here in this punch bowl. So those are significant environmental impacts, forgive me. And I just wanted the board to see a few different vantage points.
I mean, that seems to be an issue, though, with the horses, not the accessory apartment.
Well, that's why if you are putting an accessory apartment in what's deemed a horse barn, there have to be horses in there. That's just a given. I don't see logically how it's anything else but a horse barn with an accessory apartment. So assuming for a moment that there are horses there and manure is being generated, that runoff is going to be going downhill right into this punch bowl where Mr. Azar lives.
So, but let me say this: what if it is? If they can have a barn as of right, and they have a barn there and don't put an accessory apartment there, how does anything change? What does the accessory apartment add to this? Because what if we say you can't have the accessory apartment, but they can have a barn and they put a barn there? Nothing has changed from our discussion here.
Right.
Well, I think that relies on a false premise, which is that a barn with an accessory apartment above has nothing else in it. And I think it would be a little bit foolish for, at least for myself, to assume that that barn will stay vacant. If there are animals in it, if there's organic waste in it, if there's something in it that is other than pure storage, you're changing the use characteristics of the site.
But how does the accessory apartment add to the problem or add to the issue?
Well, if you're calling
let's say we deny the accessory apartment. They have a barn there. I mean, I don't know what I don't know what hazard the accessory apartment is adding to this or what concern it is. That's what I want to understand.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The hazard is this: it's being proposed as a horse barn, and the applicant is obviously equine vet and very familiar with the practices. Like I said, I think it would be silly not to assume that horses are going in there. That's why this is being proposed. If it were just an accessory apartment, it wouldn't need a barn of this scale, and the use criteria and all the special exception criteria might be a lot less onerous. But under these circumstances, I can't imagine the horses won't be in here. And if that's the case, not only does it need to be environmental quality review, stormwater study, possible steep slope study before planning board, which is all, again, site plan issues. The use of this property is fundamentally changing if that happens. So I don't think this board should or can decide the application blindly without thinking about and considering the animals that'll be in there. I think it has to.
Mr. Crusoe, I understand what you're saying about the barn and there being horses inside, and the applicant has told us that there will be horses inside, but what we discussed at last month's meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this barn is already permitted, and we're not considering whether this barn is going to exist on the property. We're looking at the apartment.
Please, no comments from the audience.
And just focusing on the apartment, the environmental issues that you're raising are not of concern to a one-bedroom studio.
Well, I think, again, and respectfully, I think this board has to be cognizant of the fact that the applicant is saying horses will be here. It can't be treated on paper functionally as an apartment without horses, because this public and this board know that horses are going in there. It is not simply a mother-daughter apartment. There are going to be very different uses on this property and in that building, so I think this board must consider that.
Well, I truly feel this way regarding the applicant at this present time. She is stating that her relative, mother, is going to stay there. This is what we have to look at this present time. In the sense of what happens 5 years from now, we have no control over that.
Well, that's a dangerous path to go, because if the board is going to just consider the apartment and ignore the fact that there could be animals in here, what's to stop the animals from being brought in there and the use entirely changed without this board's stamp of approval? That's what concerns me.
But there is code, and there are other bodies that would address those matters.
And as I've stated, I think planning board is really where this application for the apartment should lie.
And if the code let it there, then that's probably where it would end up. So again, your points may all be valid, but they're not necessarily related. This is a accessory apartment approval, which may be approved or may not be approved. That action wouldn't preclude any other code restrictions or processes from happening.
I disagree. I think
How would that stop any of those other processes from happening?
because effectively you would be, forgive this ridiculous analogy, but you'd be putting the cart before the horse here, because in this sense you're green lighting an apartment, and then the applicant, if they want to bring their horses in later and utilize this barn as a horse barn, would have to go to planning and start SECRA and the site plan process fresh from the start, already having an approval from this board for, if you will, half of the building, and the building being in place. That can't jump ahead of site
Well,
plan.
keep in mind that our approval of the accessory apartment is conditioned upon, a permit being issued and the building being constructed and being in compliance. Of course.
Sure.
Of
Yeah,
course.
no,
And that
I-
would be a condition of our approval, assuming we approve the apartment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just saying that in view of that, it could lead to some absurd results, which I don't think this board wants to countenance, of course. I'm just saying that
Sure, I understand.
the regulations contemplate site plan review and at least some involvement by the planning board in terms of a new use qualitatively on this site. I'm just advocating to this board, and
I
you
mean,
may
that's a
have that
determination that the building department would have to make if it has to go to planning. I mean, that's, the item before us here is the accessory apartment. That's what's before us. That's what I'm trying to, I think maybe what we should do is, I'd like to have some discussion about some of your legal points.
Sure.
Just because, I have some questions about some
Yeah,
of this.
whatever you like.
First, special exception use permits. I think you were mentioning that this board may not have jurisdiction over it. The zoning boards do, and we have approved, in the over 15 years I've been on this board, hundreds of them, quite honestly. This board has also approved special use permits for an accessory apartment for buildings built after 1992 with conditions. As far as I understand it, that type of an approval for time has always been an area variance. Of course, a use variance has a much higher hurdle to get across. Very difficult to get a use variance. And
Agreed.
I'll be willing to go to town council and also ask, town council's opinion as to whether the varying of the time would be an area or use variance. I don't know, Jerry, if you would like to make a comment.
Quickly, the use is permitted.
Oh, we don't have a microphone for you.
I can talk loud enough. The use is permitted in this district via a special use permit. Therefore, any problem with the specifications of the code become an area variance. This board in the past, and usually you don't have an attorney here, but I have been here on occasions when that has been done. An area variance has been given because the building was constructed after 1992. The determination of whether it's a use or an area variance is, if the use is permitted, then any deviation is an area variance.
That's been my
And
understanding.
that's been my understanding of the code.
I mean, I'll let you comment in regard to that, but let me just jump to one other thing also. Actually, why don't you comment? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, there's this isn't I don't think this is a case of not having a remedy. Personally, I think that an interpretation is required here, not a variance. If there was a permit that was issued and there was a reason why they couldn't continue to build on the site, and Mr. Citarello or the new code enforcement officer were to issue an opinion on that permit and the limitations of that permit, I think this issue would be largely moot if the applicants were seeking an interpretation of the code as to how that time restriction applies. I think that's the appropriate remedy, and that this board can grant that or deny it, but would certainly have jurisdiction
Yeah,
there.
I don't know if
So-
an interpretation is necessary. We've spoken to town council, and this has always been our practice and always my understanding that it's always been an area variance.
Well, I think this case
mean-
presents some unique circumstances procedurally, so from my vantage point, I
Okay.
see that the
All right,
interpretation
sure.
is a valid route.
Well, sure, comment, right.
But
Let me speak about one other issue, which is actually quite perplexing. The code does state, and I'll quote, "No building used for human habitation shall be used to house domestic animals,"
right,
which is an interesting point and also a confusing point, because the code seems to indicate domestic animals as cats, dogs.
right.
So, I mean, if we were to take a literal interpretation of the code, no one's allowed to have a dog or cat in their house.
Well, no, in this case,
And so that's why it's confusing as to,
yeah, I understand that.
and
It's
this
great. It's a good point. And the reason why that we can differentiate here is because this lot is more than 120,000 square feet. I think
About
it's
eight and a
8
half,
acres.
about 8.5 acres.
Right, so the code goes through domestic animals and it identifies on lots larger than 120,000 square feet. The animals that are domestic include horses, I believe pigs, a number of other ones, but that's where the distinction lies. When you have more acreage, the domestic animal classification graduates, if you will. So you wouldn't get that result that would be illogical that you were just, hitting. So I think it works in this situation because you have that size of a lot. The domestic animals would only be housed in a barn, and that structure would be prohibited from mixed use. Human habitation
This section
and
of the
animals.
code is very unclear to me. I don't really understand it. I mean, I don't know if it was overlooked. I mean, it's something I think town board should certainly clarify.
Well, it's a valid
because
point.
it's very nebulous. I don't, I can't really explain it. I mean,
Yeah.
I could certainly understand if someone had a 4-bedroom house and wanted to keep sheep in one of the bedrooms.
Right.
I think that would be a clear indication, that that's probably not allowed, or you want to keep a horse or a donkey in a house.
No,
I think that would be clearly part of the intent of the code. Where it goes beyond that, I don't know.
Thankfully, you wouldn't need any lawyers for that.
Right.
But
I would think not.
unfortunately, tonight you're stuck with me. But nevertheless, I think that graduation, that requirement as it graduates per the size of the lot, correlates with the type of animals that would naturally be considered. I mean, obviously, you couldn't keep horses and large animals on a small site, and I think that's why that code provision graduates that way. So,
And even the issue of keeping humans and domestic animals within the same building, it's such common practice that people live above barns. I see it all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we will allow it.
Right,
but,
right.
But I'm just saying is that it does seem to be a common practice. I'd like to hear from Jerry. Jerry, could you maybe just talk about this domestic animals and humans? Is there an explanation for it that you can come up with?
First of all, the fact of domestic animals and people together has nothing to do with the size of the property. If you look at where it is in the code, it's in subdivision B, which precedes all the differentiations, in the size of the property. So, if Mr. Chairman, what you said about the animals, the dogs and cats are not permitted, is precisely the result of this, taken literally. It applies carte blanche to all facilities, whether it's 1 acre, 2 acres, or 3 acres.
So if we were to take a little interpretation, there could be no dogs or
No
cats
dogs.
allowed in
That's
people's
correct.
homes.
Yes, and
Which
that would-
obviously is,
would cause a revolution.
yes, yeah, I don't,
So
that obviously doesn't make
But
sense.
the conundrum is there. It says what it says. I can't.
We can't explain it.
But this board and the building inspector are the interpreters of the code. And to interpret a code, the requirement is you to do it reasonably. And the idea of prohibiting dogs and cats, that would have to be the basis of your determination, I think. I think that the legislature should be advised that they have this in the code, and
It seems
because if they
ambiguous.
enforced it, they would never get reelected. Anyhow,
Right.
well,
Okay, so, all right, I guess it says what it says, and the board will have to come
Yeah,
up with
I mean, I
some
would-
determination as to what we think it means and interpret it and what's reasonable.
sure, that's the board's province, and I would just urge the board to use a plain, logical approach to the text that exists and the way the code is structured. I think that schedule and the way the size of the lots correlates with the changing breeds of animals and their sizes and requirements of the lot makes it very clear. So, and I don't think that would be confused with a result that would evict dogs and cats from smaller lots.
Any other questions for Mr. Caruso at this point in time? Did you have anything else at this point in time before I go to other people or?
No, like I said, I don't want to go through each point exhaustively. You can read in the brief.
Yeah, we've
I
not had a
analyze-
chance to look at this.
Yeah, and it's all there. I don't want to take too much time away from other people who want to say anything, but I will just reinforce that in considering any special exception use permit, the standards for determination, which there are a considerable number of them, are 9 total, require, even if this is just considering an apartment, the nature of the structure being called a barn, all the things that may raise, the board should still, in its diligence, consider all the environmental issues that accompany the use, the horses, the animals. This is a pretty comprehensive set of factors that have to be considered. So I just urge the boards to pay close attention to that in its review.
Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
sir. Yes. Sir, would you like to speak? Sure, absolutely. If you could just give us your name and who you represent and.
Tim Allen, Bibbo Associates, representing the applicants. In your packet, you'll find, and basically, everything has been signed off on the environmental determination on this property from the town. It's not a planning board issue. It's been signed off from Steve Wolfel on an environmental permit, subject to your board. So I'd like to just put that to bed, and basically, this plan is a little misrepresentative. We've pulled the barn back off the steep slopes. It's not a planning board issue. That's been determined.
Could you
And-
point to maybe where the new location of the barn is on
So
the,
I've got a plan, but nonetheless.
just approximately, so I could just,
It's shifted this way. There's a steep slope area here.
okay. So you moved it
It's-
off the property line more?
It's been shifted to the left of this plan,
How many feet are we talking about here?
probably about 20, 30 feet.
20, 30 feet? Okay.
So essentially, the determination has been made on the environmental issues that has been brought up. So just want to bring that to the board's attention.
Okay. So there's no planning board requirement as you know it as of now and no environmental issues?
No steep slopes, no wetlands. Everything is within administrative.
Okay.
It's the steep slopes and sediment control issue.
Now, I do have one question.
Yeah, please speak into the mic too, just so we can hear what you
All
say.
right. Now, I do have one question. Now, regarding the current septic on the main house right now, if there is failure on that septic field,
Correct.
where is there room to put additional fields? Would it be a
Well,
pump system?
we've got a brand-new septic system for the accessory apartment. So if we ever had to go to that area, we could. But in the existing septic system, there's certainly expansion area down the hill that we could expand that also.
So there's definitely room for expansion.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I think in the young lady's comments, we spoke about the health department. Have you had interaction with the health department, or is that required at all?
Health department's approved for the cottage. We were presuming that this would all be done, you know, that we would have this approval in hand before anything. We were probably months ahead of this board.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak in regard to this application, sir?
Plan. Oh, he's got a diagram.
Oh, is this the revised site plan? Okay.
Basically, and I want to give this to the board, basically what it is, the topo model
Okay.
of what Tim.
Okay, sir, if you can, yeah, I need you to go up to the microphone. Just give us your name and address.
Okay.
And the board will be happy to look at whatever you'd like to give us.
George Azar. Not on Anorak, I actually have an entrance in from 265 Route 100. And frankly, it's, according to this map, I'm actually, if you look at the key, which would be right, I gotta take the mic with me. I think I would actually be right about here with my house or dwelling, or in this case, it would be over here. What's concerning me is, if you look at the topo that I just presented to you, it does show an awful lot of steep slope that's directly behind the house. And it also shows that there is what we called before, what Mike was trying to discuss, was the punch bowl effect at the very middle of that particular plan over there.
Yes, sir, let me ask you, who prepared this, and is it to...
I did it.
Is it to scale? I mean...
It's the scale.
Are you an architect or a site planner, or...
No, what I did, I actually took a topo drawing from the town, and basically just configured it. It's actually quite precise. If I gave you it and did an overlay of it, you would see that most of the driveways, the topo itself is actually quite precise, and so are the houses.
Yeah, I mean, I would feel, we can always do a site visit, but I would always feel much more comfortable if there was a professional submitting something like this.
I'm just,
So, sir, you'll have until a moment to speak.
To-
But we have
I just want to say, I've reviewed it with George, and I am a professional engineer.
Sir, you,
Certified for you if
sir,
you'd like.
sir, you can come up and speak, but we do one at a time, please.
to be honest, I think sometimes when you see a flat piece of paper, the image that you can't see is also like a site visit. It does wonders. It speaks. There's no sentence needed. When you do have something like this, it does bring other questions, and what happens to the runoff that does come from the particular slopes that are there. And also, if you look on that model, I also have the easement that is on the top of their property over here. And
Now,
that
sir,
easement,
But sir, it seems like your discussion here is, once again about the horses. And the discussion really should be more about,
The
what is
accessory
the,
apartment.
what is the impact of the accessory apartment? That's what we have to focus on. And keep in mind,
I agree.
even if we approve the apartment and for some reason the barn isn't built or approved, then it's not applicable. Be aware of that.
well, I am here, I'm basically, it is the site plan that I am probably discussing. I know we are discussing the accessory apartment right now. It's just that I feel that being a resident here for the last 12, 13 years, and no disregard to the new owners, but it's a transformation of a place that I've lived, and basically I'm a newcomer to the neighborhood. I do look at if you look at the farm that's on 138 and Route 100, I think it's the old Bailey farm. And not that every farm is like that, but it usually is situated on a piece of property it's flat, it's got room, and in this case, I think the paddocks I think what's proposed, I think the paddocks, I don't even know if they equal an acre of property. And if we're talking about the 6 horses, my thing is like, well, if I can't discuss about the accessory apartments, like where do I go in layman's terms to figure out how is this going to get approved in my backyard, and how does like an acre of property be sufficient enough for 6 horses?
Keep in mind too, let's say we deny the accessory apartment.
Okay.
If they can build the barn as of right, they can build it.
Barn.
It's just like there's an acres, you can put a house on, let's say it's an R40 zone. You can put one house on an R40 zone, which is 40,000 square feet. Someone wants to come in and build a house. The neighbors around it can't say, well, we don't want you to build a house there. If it is as of right, they're allowed to do it. And whether it is as of right, I think it's going that way. I think the building department still has to sign off on the permit, so I don't want to speak for them, and they're doing all kinds of reviews and things like that. If it is as of right, it's as of right. And like I said, whether the board likes it or doesn't like it, we can't change that. The zoning board doesn't have ultimate power. We have to comply with the code. We can give reasonable variance from the code. We can put conditions on things, but we can't just simply say, well, we don't want this.
Right.
So I just want you to be aware of that.
Well, I think one of the reasons I'm at the podium here, it's just that the easement that is there's actually 2 different roads that drain parallel with my property, and I think it's syndicated there in the yellow. And my thing is that the erosion, because it's not a really easy place for any highway department to work on. But I have, Tommy Shiverini's been actually helping me out when we did have some storms, and I think we all went through that storm like 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday night that was almost a whiteout. And, thank God he did put the drain in for me this spring. But my thing is like, what's keeping the erosion now on the other side of the property that could subsequently come from, say, frozen ground, where grass is no longer grass, where it turns into almost like a riding soil, so to speak, and it's frozen and it runs over it and it comes into my backyard and through my yard. Right. Erosion is already evident by the amount of roots that are showing, and it's just natural that the roots are exposed already, but I don't think it's going to get any better because the grass is probably going to be removed as a matter of use. So I think in my concern with the topo and how the wear and tear of the property is probably going to go with just trucks, trailers, horseshoes. I just don't think there'll actually be a grazing area left if it's so concentrated on less than an acre of property. So that is my, that was basically my argument of, overdeveloping with, not enough proper land. And I think the code did read, your first horse has to have 2 acres and then another acre for each additional horse after that. And a majority of the property that's on the upper part is not even being cited to be developed. So I guess I'm a little confused being a layman at this. It kind of seems like there should be at least 7 acres out there for 6 horses. And, I just feel the wear and tear. It's like, yes, there is maintenance. There's topsoil that has to be added every 2 weeks. And I'm sure, being that the owner is a veterinarian, she knows the idea of keeping a clean house. But God forbid there's either a hardship or something else where neglect starts to happen, and I'm not saying it will, and I don't wish it either. But if neglect
I would make
does
mention too, the code has very specific requirements for handling of animal waste that have to be complied with.
Correct.
That would be a code violation if they didn't do that. So just be aware of that.
Okay.
And if it became a problem, that's something that code enforcement could address.
Okay. And I think, basically I set my statement, and I
Okay.
just wanted to get up here as a piece of property adjacent to the said property.
We appreciate your comments. Any questions of this gentleman? Okay, all right, thank you, sir. You can do that. Thank you. Anyone else? Sir? Yeah, please come up. Okay, sure. I'm sorry. Okay.
I won't be long.
Okay, if you could just give us your name and address, sir?
Yes, my name is Larry Fable. I live at 19 Anorak Drive since 1975.
Larry, a little closer to the mic, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, if you could speak into the mic.
Yes, Larry Fable at 19 Anorak Drive. Been there since we had the house built in 75, bought the land in 72. We bought it because it was a residential area, not a business area. My primary concern here tonight is that I'm getting the idea that somehow or other, this project for putting a business in our residential area, regardless of what kind of business it is, has been decided, and now we're just simply discussing a variance for a barn. Am I right to say that you have the power to give the area variance?
Well, you're talking about a couple different things here. I don't think anything has been proposed for a business, and a business would not be allowed on this property. It's a residential property.
Isn't a veterinarian in a business?
Well, the applicant had indicated that the veterinary work she does is off-site because she services, I believe, large animals, so she goes to other people's barns, and I would assume pens, to care for their animals. Running of a business on the property would once again be a code violation. It's not.
Yes, and do you have any power over that?
Well, let me say this: if a barn is put on the property and they begin operating a business, that would be a code violation. That would be something that would be reported to the town. Code enforcement officers would go out.
Right.
If something like that is occurring, a violation would be issued that they would have to immediately rectify. If not, it goes to town judge.
But you're saying that you can grant the right for a business to come in. You're saying that this is not necessarily going to be a business.
Sir, what we're only here tonight to do is to either allow or not allow, and maybe allow with conditions, an accessory apartment. But I had even mentioned to the applicant, would you consider not renting the apartment? That it would be used by a family member or, a groomer or somebody for the horses, but no rental, no
Well,
outside
that's
rental.
that's a small matter as far as I'm concerned, and I think for most of the neighbors. Our major concern is having what could become a very active business moving into our residential
Yeah,
neighborhood,
that would,
which we have always expected.
that would be a violation.
Like you did,
That would not be allowed, obviously.
Well, thank you.
Obviously, sir, yes. Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman in the back. Yes, sir. If you could just give us your name and address also.
My name's Barlow Humphreys.
Okay.
I'm at 4 Anorak Drive.
Okay.
I'm adjacent to 6 Anorak Drive. And it's interesting to listen to and what we can speak about and what we can't speak about. There's only one ordinance or statute that I'd like to address. And it's the use of property in the code that should not cause the creation of a hazard to human health or safety. That's from the zone code. It's section 92-6, item G. I find that particularly interesting, especially as regards the applicant's mother. To propose having a mother or any human live in an accessory apartment directly above a 6-stall horse stable and directly next to a hayloft is simply ill-advised. It has been scientifically proven that smoking leads to a high incidence of upper respiratory disease. Likewise, living above 6 horse stalls and next to a hayloft with the accompanying particulate matter in the air will lead directly to upper respiratory disease. This has been clinically proven by scientific research put out by numerous agricultural schools in the U.S., as well as equine organizations both in the U.S. and Europe. In fact, and this is what seriously puzzles me, the applicant's own veterinary school, Tufts Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, has stated this fact quite clearly in the numerous research papers. The bibliography that accompanies my letter to you, that you already have, I think you've possibly read it, possibly not,
I've seen it.
has all of the citations. I won't bore you with citations. Your time is brief. I won't bore you with the appendix. Horses that live in stables, as well as humans that work in horse stables, have increased upper respiratory infection due to particulate matter in the air. That's a scientific fact. Also on the health issue is the fact that there are many separate scientific studies that state quite clearly there are no less than 10 easily communicable diseases that can pass from horses directly to humans. Those diseases, I'm not going to list the entire list, time is short, but they certainly include things like rabies, anthrax, giardia, and ringworm, among the 10, okay? The idea of a human being, a mother, living in a horse barn is a romantic vision that just does not measure up with the reality of today's medicine. For one thing, horses do not sleep for long periods of time. They are not meant to be confined in a stall. They are meant to be able to move around all night, sleeping for an hour or so at a time, often while standing rather than lying down. Also, the inevitable banging by horses in their stalls at night against mangers and doors, being kicked, snorting, coughing, etc., are all part of nocturnal life around horses. I've worked on stud farms in the Shenandoah Valley. I grew up summers on a farm with horses. Horses don't curl up in a corner and sleep for 8 to 10 hours. That's just a reality. But living in an apartment that is above horse stalls and next to a hayloft is not just about horses. Also important, as important as a medical health issue, is the pest infestation, including rats, mice, insects, and mites, and accompanying diseases. Rats especially come with many diseases that can be passed on to humans. The list of those diseases is long and includes, but is not limited to, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, hemorrhagic fever, Lassa fever, meningitis, plague, rat bite fever, and others. That at least is what the CDC says, the Center for Disease Control of the US government. Just last month, it was proven that humans can also get hepatitis from rats, hepatitis E. These are just basic scientific facts on the record. The need to control pest infestations with the use of rodenticides and insecticides would necessarily lead to human exposure to poisonous chemicals as well as polluting our aquifers. You've been generous in letting me say what I need to say, and I've been addressing just the accessory apartment. Let me just clarify something that what you will not hear from other people, which is an 800-pound gorilla, as I consider it, in the room as far as what's happening. The problems are not just about code violations. The problem here is also about the fact that over half the homeowners in this small neighborhood of Anorak Drive are in fact retired individuals who have invested their life's earnings in their homes so as to facilitate aging in place. Some of our retirees are too bedridden to attend tonight to raise their voice in protest, although they certainly wish they could. We are trying to speak up for them as well. Literally 20 people out of the small neighborhood of 12 households are retired. The town of Somers promotes programs to support retirees aging in place. In Somers, it is officially called At Home in Somers. The loss of home equity is a very significant loss at any stage of life, but particularly so with retirees. Anorak Drive is not the only small neighborhood in Somers with retirees who have chosen the option of aging in place. If the ZBA decides in favor for 6 Anorak Drive being able to bring in 1 or more horses with its accessory apartment, if it permits the inevitable destruction of our neighborhood character and our property values, then that decision will reverberate loudly and clearly. It cannot help but have a ripple effect to other neighborhoods in Somers. It will send a strong message to the retirees throughout Somers that to retire at home in Somers is not safe, that they need to look elsewhere. Your decision on 6 Anorak Drive is unquestionably going to have implications and repercussions throughout the town of Somers. I'm sure you're aware of that, and I know I'm aware of that, and the neighborhood is. I want to point out something that George Azar said that was, I think, very easy to lose sight of as regards the accessory apartment. If you look at the topo, the modeling, the 3D model that he circulated with you folks, what he was trying to explain, and I had not known it, I've only been there 31 years, but I did not realize I lived in a punch bowl. But I do. The accessory apartment, for me, is very really at risk. I think it's nice that you moved it 10 yards away from the steep slopes. But the fact of the matter is, steep slopes have water runoff with high velocity, torrential rains. We have torrential rains now. Torrential rains down the cliffs, down the sides of the punch bowl, are serious causes for inundation of the barn. Not just bringing manure, it'll be bringing water with manure into our aquifers, into the punch bowl, into George's area and myself. It's a real concern. It's the velocity due to the extreme cliffside, the extreme slope, which is a real concern. That's what we're trying to communicate with the 3D. And we would certainly appreciate a visit by you folks. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions of this individual? Any questions? You know, one comment I want to make is, you had made...
Possibly circulate these among your members so that everybody sees what I'm trying to do.
Sure. One thing I want to make mention of is that, Mr. Humphreys, in your comments, you know, once again, the zoning board is not deciding whether the barn and the horses can be on the property. It's not a matter before us. It's not part of our jurisdiction. The only item we were discussing this evening is whether we will allow an accessory apartment above the barn should it be built. I just want you to be aware of that. This board cannot disallow the property's basic use. If you're not happy with, or not pleased with, or the residents are not pleased with the way the code reads, the code has to be changed. All of us on the board have taken an oath to abide by the code, give
Yes, sir.
reasonable variance from the code, but we can't change the code. We're not changing the law. It's like any judge, not supposed to change the law, you're supposed to follow the law. So I just want you to be, I'm just trying to add that clarity, sir.
Right. Mr. Chairman?
I just want to,
Thank you
okay.
for clarification. Mr. Chairman, I think what I think in good faith, you're listening, and I appreciate the listening. What I'm trying to express, and tell me if I've expressed it or it was fairly expressed or communicated, are you saying, in effect, that all of the health concerns for somebody living next to a hayloft and above 6-stall horse barn are irrelevant? I'm just a fair question.
No, anything applicable to the apartment is something we have to consider. We have to consider whether an apartment should be there, and if there are health issues, that's something we can consider. But only related to the apartment, not the horses run off to other properties. That's not before us. And whether horses can be on the property is not a matter that we can decide. Whether a barn should be there is not a matter we can decide.
Right. I appreciate that, but are you saying it's irrelevant, the health and well-being of the person in?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. No,
So I did not waste your time?
No, absolutely. No.
I didn't want to waste your time.
Your comments are well taken, yes. If you feel that there is, and have provided some documentation that there may be health issues related to somebody living above a barn, that's something we have to take into consideration, absolutely.
Because it is scientifically proven. And because people do it, the fact that Tufts Veterinary School says it's ill-advised, and that there's increased respiratory asthma in people who work in the barns, especially live in barns, due to the particulate matter, it has to be a consideration. I know you can't change. I was speaking with Tom over here, who's a wonderful man. Tom, always a pleasure to chat with you. And Tom and I agreed that, I think we would all agree, that the code is maybe a little bit outdated. Maybe we should update it. It's not your fault, and I'm not pointing to you for blame.
And keep in mind, this code goes way back, probably before many of the board members who are there now. So
I respect that.
Revisions always have to be considered.
I stood in the building department and talked with Ephraim, and we agreed that the code, the zoning code, as it's currently written, is a Rorschach test that means whatever you want it to mean, depending on this particular issue. And he said, by all means, discuss with the Zoning Board of Appeals your point of view, and I appreciate your hearing my point of view. I would just hope something outside the code, which is the 800-pound gorilla that I shared with you, is there are a lot of retirees in Somers. And if you are serious about wanting to keep us in Somers, and you don't want to disband, aging in place at home in Somers, your decision is a direct reflection on how you feel about it. And I can't help but think, fairly said, that if you decide against the neighborhood, you will be deciding against retirees. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sir, if you'd like to come up?
I should be, like to say one thing. All right? We run a professional meeting here, and we want to clap, do it when it's all over with, please, and keep it down to the bare minimum. In the sense of clapping after everyone speaks, that is not professional, and we will not allow that to happen. So thank you very much for your cooperation, please.
Sir, if you could give us your name and address?
Yes, thank you. My name is Dominic Veltri. I live with my wife at 3 Anorak Drive. We live at Anorak Drive. We've lived at Anorak Drive since 1994. My house is the last house to be built on Anorak Drive as we know it today. It was built in 1990. I did send a letter to the zoning board, Mr. Chairman. I think it was stamped in last week, and hopefully it was circulated to you. But I do want to address the special exception use permit and the area variance for the apartment. Section 170-70B of the Somers Code states an accessory apartment may be located within a principal dwelling building or in an accessory building, provided that such principal building or accessory was constructed or issued a building permit prior to April 1st, 1992. It's perfectly clear, and that's a quote from the code. Since this building in which the accessory apartment has not been permitted as of yet, or maybe it was, I would like to ask for a clarification, because I think someone mentioned that the building was permitted, the barn. Do we know that?
I don't think a permit has officially been issued yet for the barn.
So let's assume it hasn't been permitted. The code clearly addresses the fact that the building wasn't permitted before 1992.
Well, obviously, it would not be built before 1992.
So another section of the code. So therefore, just on that code, not rewriting the code, whether it's archaic or not, it is the code till it gets changed. And a basic interpretation says if the building was permitted before 1992, some credence and some determination should be made relative to that fact. Building isn't even permitted now, let alone being built.
Well, let me just say this, if we were to approve an apartment, it of course would be conditioned upon it being permitted and built, obviously. And just keep in mind that this board has before granted accessory apartments varied from the code after the 1992 date. Sometimes they've been denied, sometimes they've been approved. So I just wanted to let you know that this would not be precedent being set here.
All right, and then
Just so
I
you're
do want to address section 170-70H of the zoning code. It says, and I quote, prior to the issuance of a building permit for accessory building for existing accessory building to an accessory apartment use, approval of the proposed method and adequacy of water supply and sewage disposal shall be obtained from the Westchester County Department of Health and shall be further subject to the engineering review of the town. I think Mr. Allen indicated that the Board of Health approved the septic and water. So it's interesting because I researched the Board of Health, and as of this week, there was no approval for anything other than the septic system and the well that went in on the property in 1962.
We could have Mr. Allen
All right, so
address that.
we should
could have Mr. Allen
check
address
that. Additionally, records on this property indicate that it's a 5-bedroom primary residence, and we do not believe any new approvals have been granted from the Westchester County Department of Health relative to expanding that. Okay? This would add another bedroom, so unless there is an approval from the Board of Health, we'd like to see that.
Yeah, I think Mr. Allen did mention that there was a separate septic tank and field for this accessory apartment, but he can fill in. I don't want to speak for him.
Well, I was at the Westchester County Board of Health last week, and I did receive an email from them as of a few days ago, and there was no application for
Mr.
an
Allen will
expansion.
have to address
Okay.
that. Thank you.
Also, section 170-70O of the code, coupled with section 170-106 of the code, basically says that the Zoning Board of Appeals has discretion relative to this application with regard to a couple of key points. One is the adverse impact it will have, and I quote, "on the character of the neighborhood or adversely affect property values or would tend to undermine the stability of the area and the tax therefrom." Another point it says is the fact that it, quote, "will not reasonably serve the public health, safety, and general welfare, or reasonably promote the purpose and intent of this section," and we don't believe it does that. And the last section is, and I quote, "the disadvantages of granting the special permit outweigh the benefits connected with the same." Additionally, based on information available in the building department and with the engineering department, and I understand there was a determination made by the building engineer probably today or yesterday, and he specifically indicates that there's a type 2 action and no environmental impact for the property. And I think the barn, the proposal, the paddocks, they're all mutually exclusive, mutually inclusive. I don't think you can take the barn and the accessory apartment without looking at the entire proposed plan. But the applicant is requesting to build a detached structure with an 8-stall horse barn. It's in the record here, so we know there's going to be horses. Without its intended use and comprehensive
Six
plan.
stalls.
I think it's 6 stalls.
Six stalls.
A washing.
A wash and attack room.
Right.
A hayloft, a well, a septic, okay? Moving away from the steep slope, a 100-foot drop from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill, the punch bowl, the easement that goes out to Mr. Czar's house. We haven't even talked about the other paddock on the other side of the property, which goes into a covert that floods into Plumbrook Lake that goes into the reservoir system. So I'll continue.
But sir, you have to tell us why you think the accessory apartment.
All right, well, and then
I mean,
there's
here
a
again, we have to focus on the accessory apartment. That's what this board has to do.
and I've addressed a couple of points, but also in section 170-69B, which talks about the keeping of domestic animals, it specifically says, and I quote, under section 2 there, "No building used for human habitation shall be used to house domestic animals." Again, there is no basis within the code, and I don't care how you want to interpret it, it's pretty clear to me as I read it, and other folks that have read it, that clearly an accessory apartment in a barn that's intended to be used for horses is not allowed, let alone in a barn that hasn't been permitted before 1992 and everything else that's before the board to consider. So I think it's important to look at the keeping of domestic animals section of the code, which is section 170-69, and I have to respectfully disagree with, I think, Mr. Riley, because you're talking about dogs and cats and domestic animals in houses, but the code is very clear. It talks about sheep, goats, donkeys, poultry, under section 170-69. It doesn't talk about dogs and cats. And 170-69 specifically says, under section A, it says a special exception use permit may be granted after public notice and hearing by the Board of Appeals. I believe that's you. In any district for the purpose of keeping domestic animals of a type or in excess of those specified in section 170-11, and it talks about horses in section 170-11, subject and pursuant to the standards described in section B below and section 170-106, which, as you know, is the standards for determination. So under section B of section 170-69, it says the applicant must declare the maximum number and type of domestic animals to be permitted and present a map of his property and attest to, among other things, that no building used for human habitation shall be used to house domestic animals. And also talks about manure, how it should be managed, where it should be stored, how it has to be handled, among other things.
Right.
But there's a plan in front of the town engineer that's already been approved, and in his memorandum, he says it's a type 2 action with no environmental impact. And I find that hard to believe because it hasn't even come in front of your board where they need a special permit for horses How do we know there's no environmental impact if we don't know how many horses are gonna be there to begin with?
Yeah, that's not a matter that would come before the board here.
Well, someone should flag it, because someone showed up in the building department and said, I want to put an apartment over a accessory barn that isn't even built, and the first thing the building inspector did was, you have to go in front of the zoning board because you need a special use permit.
Correct.
Well, the code is telling me we need a special use permit to be looked at and granted after public hearing and notice by the zoning board for the keeping of horses. Did something happen where we missed that?
For the keeping of horses?
Yeah. Well, keeping of domestic animals.
I'm not sure what you're referring to there, sir.
So, Mr. Chairman,
not the
section
keeping.
170-69, I'm going to read it again. Keeping of domestic animals. It clearly states under section A, a special exception use permit may be granted.
Oh, if someone wants to keep animals in excess of what the code provides, maybe that would come before us. Like if you're allowed so many horses per acreage and somebody wants more, they could come to us and we could either accept that or
It
deny
also
it.
says that the zoning board has
But I can't
broad
pro-
jurisdiction
but we
over
can- but
the
we can-
number of horses.
If they can do something as of right, we can't prohibit that. If the code allows a certain number of horses per acre, that's what they allow. If they want something in excess of that, they'd have to come before us because they're varying from the code. But that doesn't mean that we can say, no, you
It
can't have
says-
horses. We
Mr.
can't
Chairman,
deny
Mr.
them.
Chairman, I respectfully need to clarify this for you. The code specifically says, and I'm reading it from the code, it says, in any district for the purposes of keeping domestic animals of a type, or in excess. Not and in excess. It says or.
Sir, I would have to look at the
Well,
entire section. I can't just have one
and
sentence read
I-
to us and come up.
And for the record, I'm not
And I
trying.
can also go to our town council to have them comment
And I
also
would
on it.
appreciate if you could do that, because I do think that there was a logical step that was missed. Because in my mind, the logical step, just looking at the apartment, somebody showed up and said, I want to put an apartment in, and immediately the flag goes up, you need a special use permit. The way I read this code, and others that have read the code and talked to me about the code and said, you're right. It says you need a special use permit approved by the zoning board after a public hearing and notice, and I don't think that happened yet.
There's been public notice given. That's
Not
the re- that's the
relative to the keeping of horses.
It's not required. Anybody who wants to keep a domestic animal does not have to come before this board.
I think, Mr. Chairman, for a moment, if I could just put some clarity on an issue, maybe this would help, and maybe Tim would be of assistance too. What I think we're circling around, listening to Dominic's comments, and I touched on this a little bit too. Maybe this is where we're missing, if you will. Under section 170-60 of the code, where it requires site plan approval for certain activities, and as the board indicated, some of these may be as of right, the code provides that, and I'm quoting, except as provided for in a certain section of this chapter or where the requirement for the approval has been specifically waived, that is site plan approval, all uses under Articles 12 through 15, which include the keeping of domestic animals, which I inserted there, shall be subject to the approval of site plan by the planning board as provided under section 170-20. So I think what might help, maybe Tim, you can elaborate on this, is whether there's been a waiver of site plan that's been issued by the planning board in considering this application, because clearly, as of right, if that's the board's position for these uses, it must consider whether there's been a site plan waiver, at least for now. That's in the code. So I think that kind of gets at what Dominic was identifying. And was there a site plan waiver? Is there an automatic site plan review required? There is, unless there's a waiver. And I'm not aware of a waiver having been issued.
Mr. Riley, I'll let you comment in regard to this.
No, I don't know anything about the site plan requirement. I don't see where there's been a determination made by the building department that site plan approval is required. I'm looking at the code right here. I don't have the code on the site plan, but, you know, my suggestion is if these issues are to be considered, they're being raised for the first time, and the building inspector is seeing this, as you said in the very beginning, for the first time. He wasn't the building inspector when this application came in. that he should be allowed to look at this, not, and see what, as the building inspector, he believes the proper course is, because it is true that the town engineer did do the reviews that have been discussed by the neighbors, but whether, and it would be a type 2 action because under the 22 NYCRR, an area variance and a special use permit are type 2 actions. Now, could they change under circumstances? That would be up to the board, but it is defined as a type 2 action.
Yeah, I've never seen a site plan review, though, that I can recall.
No, I haven't either, but-
On this type of where someone is building an accessory building, I mean, do they normally go before site plan review on that?
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of.
But in any event, I do think that things have been raised, that Mr. Tom here should be able to have a look at it. Plus, we have, the memorandum of, I don't know how many pages, and I don't think I haven't read it.
No, we just received it this evening.
So I think the issues have been presented, and my suggestion would be to adjourn the matter so that the board members can look at what's been presented to them, and Mr. Toomer can, to make sure that, your analysis, which I believe is correct, that the only thing before this court, definitely, before this board, is the apartment, right now. Now, should the horses have been before that determination was never made. And this board can't address something that's not before it. And if it was an error not to raise it, well, Mr. Toomer will find that out. So I don't, there's a lot of repetitive going on, repetitive stuff
Because
going on.
in the
today.
past, when we've looked at special exception use permits, we've never had site plan issues
No,
related to it.
no,
Never. It has
no.
never happened in, like I said, 15-plus years I've been on this board, I've never seen that. But if we think that it's something maybe we want to look
Well,
at.
I think the one thing that should be looked at is whether there's been a claim that the very fact of having animals, and I looked at the section, and it does say "or," but I never looked at it. I just looked at these things from the issues that were raised previously.
Right.
And that seems to be new.
And I realize it's hard to look at these complex issues and read the code while we're all just sitting here.
Correct,
You
but I
need time
can't-
to go home and look at, you're looking at it on your iPhone, I understand
And
that.
I got bad
And
eyes.
it's not fair for the building inspector either to
No.
make determinations on the fly here. It's something you have to sit down,
Yeah.
read, and look at,
Yeah.
and understand.
So that would be my suggestion, that you adjourn the hearing now, and everyone, the board members, council, and the building inspector. But I would also suggest, and I mentioned this to Denise, that the board put a date when all materials have to be before it, so you don't show up next month, and then, Mr. Caruso and I, unload a brief on you. Or,
I would certainly agree with that. Getting documents the night of the meeting,
it's crazy.
it's not acceptable. I mean, I think things should be in at least maybe 10 days before the board meeting.
That's standard.
I mean, standard, is that what you see? I mean, maybe
That
that's,
is standard in other jurisdictions.
10 days before, because if something isn't presented to us 10 days before the meeting that we have a chance to look at it, we're just put at a bad spot here.
That's my suggestion.
Okay. So that's something that I would think for this matter, would the board agree? I mean, we could just do it by consensus, that maybe we'll put in a 10-day requirement. Okay. Yeah, that would be delivered to the zoning board office for us to consider it, because we can't be getting things the night of the meeting, so. Yeah, Mr. Allen, would you like to comment in regard to this? I know there have been some issues that were discussed regarding.
Well, I'd like to go back to the original premise of what we're here for, is that it's an accessory apartment. I'm looking back through the special exemption use on keeping of animals. I'm not seeing site plan approval required. Having said that, I may be wrong. We've done this before in past applications, and it's never been a problem. This is about the accessory apartment. We'll go back to the original premise of this whole thing. It's not about the keeping of the animals. If I've got to go back to the planning board for keeping of the animals, that's really not what we're here to discuss tonight. And I would like to remind the board of that. So, and Mr. Riley can back me up on this, that's not before this board tonight. We can always go back to the planning board if need be, and if the building inspector says, Tim, you gotta go back to the planning board, you go back to the planning board. This is about the accessory apartment. It's about the accessory apartment only. If the planning board has to review the application as a whole, and I'm wrong, or the applicants are wrong, then we gotta go to the planning board.
Yeah, Mr. Riley, what about that point? I mean,
I don't
let's,
see, I have never
because
seen how the planning board gets involved in this, and I still haven't.
I have
I'm
not seen
not
it.
looking-
But-
I've
but
got
if
it right
we-
here. I've
But
got
if
it
we
right
were
here.
to approve the apartment or not approve the apartment.
Right.
Can't planning board do what planning board wants to do or not do? And the animals are not before us. I mean, I
That's
don't know
correct.
that we should be, I mean, should we be delaying this matter? I don't,
It's up to you. But the animals are not, so if.
The
a
animals are
special
not an
permit-
issue before us.
If a special permit is needed for the animals, that's another day.
that would be another, right, we
If-
could accept
if
or
that-
deny that.
yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a special exception use permit required for the animals, right? If there is a need to go before the planning board, how is that relevant to us approving or denying the accessory apartment?
What I'm saying is that if there is some way to read the code, that the applicant must get a special use permit, not only for the apartment is A, the animals are B. If that would be the case, you can't decide that. It has no relevance to the apartment, like Tim said, but maybe they have to, I don't know.
Sorry about that, folks.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing it here, but again, I'm not perfect, nor is anybody else on this board, so if I'm wrong, but nonetheless, we've noticed this meeting for a public hearing for the accessory apartment. We've deliberated very hard tonight on the accessory apartment. We've had ancillary discussions on the alternate uses of this, which are not purview to that public hearing. I'd ask you to vote on the accessory apartment, and let's at least get that out of the way.
Please, no comments from the audience, please. Okay,
That's my opinion.
sure, thank you, sir. Okay. So at this time, I mean, I think you want to continue to hear from people in the audience on this, and we're going to proceed with it? Right, as opposed to adjourning the matter? I mean, I'm not sure I really know if this matter should be adjourned or not.
I believe we should hear it tonight.
Hear it tonight?
Yeah, everybody
Right.
should have their say.
Right, okay. Okay, who else would like to speak in regard to this application?
Can I
Do you want
finish?
to have one more comment? Okay.
No,
yes,
I
sir.
want to finish.
If you could finish it,
I
sir.
will try to get through it.
Yeah,
And for the record, I
yeah,
mean,
try to
I
keep it
realize,
brief, sir.
I realize the board was given a lot of information at the last minute, but the stormwater permit was issued yesterday for this whole matter. And Mr. Allen came here tonight and he wanted to speak about the accessory apartment, but he showed us the entire site plan for the first time in a public forum, as opposed to everybody in the audience that lives on Anorak Drive combing through the building department for the past month to try and get this information. So, you know, they are mutually inclusive. You can't look at the accessory apartment in a barn for horses and the paddocks that Mr. Allen put up and not look at addressing the keeping of domestic animals, specifically horses, on this property.
Okay, sir.
And
Okay.
it's a frustrating matter, and believe me, I'd rather be at a Boy Scout meeting tonight. I didn't want to be here addressing this board. I mean, but this is an important matter for our neighborhood, certainly for me. I do want to talk about, I'm going to skip the standards of determination because it does talk about character of the neighborhood, and that does apply to the apartment because it does change the character of the neighborhood, because if the board grants the apartment in this particular case, then anybody in Somers could build a structure and put an accessory apartment on it. We're going to set a precedence. The code is the code. Whether it's archaic or not, it is the code. And we respect that the board should honor that. Relative to the type 2 determination by the site engineer, the town engineer on the site plan, I read through the environmental quality review section of the code, which is section 92, and I don't know whether this belongs in front of the zoning board at some point or the planning board, but the determination was that it's a type 2 action, and type 2 actions say that there's no environmental impact. I think Mr. Razar indicated the punch bowl, the easement, the downflow, the steep slope, and we didn't even get to look at Mr. Tom Bastani's side of the property, which is off of number 8 Anorak Drive, which is on the other side of the topographical map, and the storm drain that goes into underneath his driveway that flows all the way down to the Plum Brook Reservoir, Plum Brook Brook, and goes into the reservoir system. But one of the actions under the environmental section, it talks about type 1, type 2, and unlisted actions. And under section C, the unlisted actions specifically say, unlisted actions or classes of actions are actions which are neither type 1 or type 2, and which may have a significant effect on the environment if they can reasonably be expected by the agency to lead to one of the following consequences. And there's a whole bunch of consequences, and I'm just going to cite a few, in our opinion, that are applicable to this particular site plan. One is a substantial adverse change to ambient air, light, or water quality, noise levels, or a solid waste production, drainage, erosion, and flooding. Section E, the impairment of the character or quality of important historical, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources, or of the existing community or neighborhood character. F, a substantial change in the use of either the quality or type of energy. The creation of, G, the creation of a hazard to human health or safety. H, a substantial change to the use or intensity of the use of land or other natural resources, or in the capacity of land or other natural resources that support it. And then under section 2 there, the purpose of determining whether an action will cause one of the foregoing consequences, the action shall be deemed to include other contemporaneous or subsequent actions which, A, are included in any long-range comprehensive integrated plan of which the action under consideration is a part, B, are likely to be undertaken as a result thereof or are dependent thereon. So there's enough actions here. I don't think this is a type 2 action and flippantly passed along by the town engineer. I think it should be looked at more comprehensively. In fact, section 92 of the code references determinations that are made by the various town agencies, specifically will not lead to the impairment of neighborhood character. This fact is cited at least 15 times in that section of the code. And I think you're hearing tonight that there is a significant impact, in our opinion, to the character of our neighborhood. I'd be willing to give you these documents. All the sections I've read from are highlighted. I'll give them to you, Mr. Chairman. You can share them with the board. You don't have an easy decision to make here. I certainly respect that. But we've been in this neighborhood for a long time. And for the board to act in favor of one owner that just moved into the neighborhood and forego the other 30 families and residences that are impacted by the decision to put horses in the adjoining property is really something that has to be considered. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir? Thank you. Thank you. Sir, can you give us your name and address?
My name is Steve Miller, reside at 22 Anorak Drive for 25 years or so. You've clarified a couple of things so far. The barn is not permitted as far as I understand, though.
Meaning, well, when you say permitted, a permit, a building permit has not been issued. Whether it is a permitted use and it will be issued is to be determined.
Correct. Okay, so thank you. The site plan I see has quite a lot of, we have a new sewage system, we have a new well. I'm assuming the board considers this a significant amount of work. I see one nod. Is that correct?
I don't know what your definition of significant is.
That's why I'm asking you. Is this considering this?
You have to have septic available for more bedrooms when you add on, and that's what the applicant has done here. I know it's 8.5 acres. I don't know. It's not a tremendous amount of development for a property of that size. I mean, from
New impervious surface, a couple of 100 feet of driveway, I believe, also on the plan. So it is significant to this particular neighborhood, considering the topography of the land. If it is significant, it must go to the planning board. That is in the code. And as a site plan thing, it has nothing to do with an apartment, horses, or anything else. That's an intangible to me at the moment.
Keep in mind, we don't make the decision on what goes to the planning board. Just be aware of that.
Well, it says the zoning board of appeals finds if significant site work will be required to increase the parking areas, enlarge the subsurface sewage, or otherwise alter the physical site conditions, it conditionally must go to the Site plan approval by the planning board.
That would be something the building department would determine if planning board approval is necessary.
But it says here the zoning board of appeals.
Sir, I'm not going to, I have to read the entire code and all of the surrounding paragraphs before I can give you an
It's in, just
interpretation.
for the record, it's in 177M.
If you want to make your point, and, we'll take a
That's one of the tangibles. I find there's a lot of tangible things here, steep slopes, all that stuff. The intangibles still come to the fact that of the 20 families here on that block, 16 by my county here. I don't think we can get 5 people to agree that these walls are white right now. But we have 16 of 20 families physically here for the second meeting to voice our opinions of this site plan and the apartment that goes with it and the intangibles. I would implore this board to at least walk the site, the physical site itself, and the neighborhood, to see the true character of the whole block, not just the site. It does go all hand in hand in that point. I would implore you to do that walk. It's important to us. Thank you.
Now, I will say, I took the liberty today,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
all right, to introduce myself, all right, and do a site walk. Now, again, as I stated last month, I do work for the town of Somers. Now, in the sense of the neighborhood, I know it not as well as you do, because you go up and down every single day, but I have to say, I've been up and down that road many times. I helped do the paving on that road, clean the catch basins on that road.
Thank you.
All right, and I have to say, there are houses in that particular area are in the flood zone. So in the sense of property value, I take that in consideration too, in the sense of having horses that may or increase property value, depends upon whether or not.
Well, we're
you
not
like-
talking about the horses now.
No,
We're not
I'm just
talking
saying.
about the horses.
No, I'm just saying. Okay? Or a
talking about the
house, or a
apartment.
house that's definitely in the flood zone, that would lower the value of the house. So, you asked for us to walk the property, which is a very legitimate request. And all I can say is, based on the information that I know, and walking a piece of property. Now, again, as the chair has said, the only thing that's in front of us, really, is the apartment building, the accessory apartment. Everything else that has been, brought in front of us by the town's professional, we have to go by. Yes, we can question them, and they have to back their information that they approve or deny. And with the professionalism that we have with this town, I personally would have to go along with the professionals that we have. And that's where I stand regarding the information that's presented to the board.
And if that is, I appreciate you taking a walk at least through the neighborhood. That's a big step, because it means a lot to, obviously, not just to see the site and to go by a blueprint. It
Right.
doesn't, there's something else to this, obviously.
Now, I will say one other thing, too. I have a granddaughter who is 17 and a half years old, who I love dearly. And the information that I've heard tonight, I will pass on to her, because she's been riding since she was 2 years old. But as a grandfather at this particular moment, and with the information that I have, will I ever put her in harm's way? No, but with the information that I heard tonight, okay, I will not deny her love, passion for horses. And she will be going on to further education, and she is thinking about becoming a large animal vet.
Please, no.
Okay?
Please.
No, I'm just saying, all this stuff has been brought up,
Please.
okay?
Please,
All
no
the
comments
stuff-
from the audience.
All this stuff has been brought up. So it's my turn to bring it back up and let people know how I personally feel. Thank you.
Just like to bring back up that site plan. I believe it's important, and I think it has something to do, and you can check that code, please. I'm sorry if I bothered you for having you check that.
Does anybody else wish to speak in regard to the application? Ma'am, you can come up. Please give us your name and address.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Fusco. I live at 1 Anorak Drive. I just want you to really consider everything that came forward tonight. I think they brought up all good points. There are tons of codes that came up tonight that everyone on this board is unaware of. And I think if you make a decision tonight on an accessory apartment, you do not have the full information in front of you. And I really feel that you need to delay this again. You need to read all of the codes that we put forward tonight and really consider, and also consider the fact of all the health codes that came up tonight as well, to think about the accessory apartment only. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
Good evening, Karen Wagner, 8 Wellington Lane. Mr. Chairman and board members, I think that my comments tonight pertain to an issue that we've all been struggling with all evening, which is jurisdiction. And I was happy to hear the chairman.
Turn the mic up a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. I was glad to hear the chairman affirm the commitment to the code. I'm going to read a section pertaining to the board's jurisdiction. 170-110A. The Board of Appeals shall hear and decide appeals from and review any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by any administrative official charged with the enforcement of this chapter. I posit to you that by the building inspector, that is the prior building inspector, having looked at an application for a 6-stall horse barn, paddocks, all the impacts we talked about, steep slopes, stormwater, and only flagged it for an accessory apartment, that by necessity, the building inspector, pursuant to 170-110, did determine that it was compliant with all other aspects of the code. Therefore, that brings it within this board's purview. You might recall that at the September meeting, I specifically asked, was there a written decision of the building inspector so that we could know that he checked off compliance with all of the codes? And the board said that they did not have such determination, but also that they did not want to ask the then building inspector to provide it. So
Well, let me comment in regard to that. I think to ask the building inspector every time that he or she, whoever it may be, makes a determination that they are required to list every aspect of the code that was looked at and reviewed is an undue burden. If you feel, if the building inspector is going to issue a permit and you feel that permit is in violation of the code, anyone can appeal the decision of the building inspector to us and we will review it. But it is not incumbent on the building inspector to justify his decision. His decision is based on the code to the best of his ability. If someone feels that that is not a correct decision, then you can certainly bring an application before the board. So if the building inspector decides that yes, the barn is a permitted use and the structure itself meets the criteria, you can go through the code and say, wait a minute, it's in violation of this, this, and this, and that can be brought before the board. But the building inspector is not required to justify in writing every single determination he makes. We'll need 5 building inspectors in town if we're going to do that. That's not going to work, and that's not practical. That's not reasonable.
Well, then to that I would say that that's fine if that doesn't want to make that a custom in the town. I think that it would be logical to assume that given the comprehensiveness of the town's code, we've spoken to the residential zone, the groundwater protection district, that if the only thing the building inspector referred out was the accessory apartment, that perforce.
They always have to be
Sure.
referred out.
But perforce, one could reverse engineer or say logically that then the logical assumption is that's the only code compliance problem
So
that
far?
was found by the former building inspector.
Correct.
And if you are assuring all of us, Mr. Chairman, that if and when the building inspector, the new one, does sign off on the barn as it's ultimately configured, with or without the accessory apartment, that then we will have the opportunity to appeal that determination to this board. I think that would assure the entire audience that we still would have the right to be heard, because we've been hearing tonight and last time, that the jurisdiction is limited only to the accessory apartment, which is why I brought up what was
Tonight-
necessarily decided
Tonight
by
is
the
only
building
the accessory
inspector.
apartment, because no other application has been made that there is any violation or there's any other issue applicable here. So if the building inspector issues a permit and you think that has been issued in error or there's a violation, then please bring that before us.
Now, Mr. Chairman, will there be any way, other than by diligently checking with the town, that at least those of us who received a notice of the accessory apartment application will be told when and if a building permit issues, so that we won't be constrained or precluded time-wise?
All building permits and plans are public record. Anybody can go in and look at the plans and look at the code. The code is public information, obviously.
Okay, so then I know that the board wouldn't necessarily want to deal in hypotheticals, but let's say the building permit issues whenever it issues. At that time, if those of us here tonight or others that are not present find issue with the compliance with the groundwater overlay protection district and the hydrological survey that's required, if that hasn't been done, those are matters that this board would entertain at that time?
No.
Environment, I'll let you comment, Jerry.
The only way a matter gets before this board is if there is a claim of a error by the building inspector or an application for a variance. So what would happen, there would be no notice to the neighbors of when a building permit, so what you said was correct, Mr. Chairman. You have, yes, and to the speaker, you have to be diligent, but you know, assuming the lady is going to build a barn, she will need a permit. So your diligence is necessary. You will not get notice from the board or anyone else that a building permit is there. You have to go find it.
Right.
And then you can, if you find something wrong with it, then you make an application to the zoning board.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak, sir? Would you like to start? Could you just give us your name and address, please?
My name is Dave Potter, and I'm the joint owner of 6 Anorak Drive. And I only want to make 3 points. One that was brought up is property values. We're sinking roughly $500,000 into this property. And if you talk to real estate agents, they'll tell you that when you do investment in property, you can't expect to get back in terms of market value 100%, but you can't expect maybe to get back 70 or 80%. So the market value of our property is going to go up by roughly $400,000. How anybody can think that's going to negatively affect the property values in the neighborhood probably needs their head examined.
Okay, no comments, please.
Secondly, regarding the health issues,
Pierre, listen, we do not want discussion between members of the audience, please. All discussions should be addressed to the board. Okay?
regarding the health issue, Mr. Humphries has done some pretty good research, but I guess I have to give him a C+ because he never went far enough. We know the person who did that, published that issue regarding horses and asthma from Tufts University. First of all, I'd like to make a comment that Westchester County has the largest population of horses of any county in the United States. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. But Westchester County doesn't even show up in the top 100 of cases of asthma in the United States. So the correlation between horses and asthma is a little weak. Secondly, if he had read further into that study, he would understand that the reason that horses get asthma is that amateur people who have stalls and barns, not professionals, think that they have to button up their barns at night to keep their pets warm, which is not the case. You should always keep the barn doors and windows open. You don't see cows and deer running around at night or in the wild with jackets and coats on. Horses need to have circulating air, and if they do, with the wind or through an exhaust fan, which is what we do in professionally managed barns, you don't have the particulate problem, because all that stuff is getting either blown out or sucked out of the barn. As it applies to the various diseases associated with horses, again, Mr. Humphreys probably didn't read on far enough. Half of the diseases he mentioned are applicable to horses, but not horses in the United States. Horses in Europe or South America, one in particular, only applies to a horse in Australia. And as far as the hepatitis E coming from a rat, one case in the whole world, which happens to be in Hong Kong, was discovered. So making a statement that we're going to have all kinds of medical problems because of rats is, that's like horse manure, if you ask me. Doesn't these folks understand that there is a way to manage pests in barns? I have not seen, when we consult on managing barns, I have not seen a rat in a professionally managed barn in 25 years. Ever heard of a barn cat? Ever heard of those black boxes that kill the rats? Ever heard of an AK-47, if you want to go that far? You're not going to have rats in a professionally managed barn. I don't know what they're thinking about in terms of what kind of a barn this is going to be. They simply don't understand the difference between some rinky-dink barn that's dirty and it's got manure all over the place and it's got rats and everything else, between that and a professionally managed barn. Has anyone been to Heritage Farms around here? You can eat off the floor of the barn because it's professionally managed. And that's what our barn would be, because we're professional barn managers. We know about this kind of stuff. So, the other thing I want to bring up is that a lot of the concerns everybody has, and I appreciate them, and if half of the concerns that they have would be true, then they would be legitimate in having concerns and what it's going to do about the neighborhood. But first of all, manure management is a science. And most people don't realize that 75 to 80% of the manure that's produced by horses is produced in the stall or in the turnout. The turnout is that little piece of fencing that is right off the stall, not into the paddocks. So the paddock is getting a very small percentage of the horse's manure, which is, as we say in the business, is picked every day. You go around with either a wheelbarrow or a trailer and you pick it up with a pitchfork. You bring it back and you throw it in the container. So you don't have a manure problem. The other thing is that professionally managed meadows are 75 to 80% grass all year long, because you rotate the horses so that they don't make the thing muddy. So you have all that grass almost all the time. And finally, I guess I'd have to say is that if we don't even build a barn, what's going to change about the topography in this neighborhood? The barn isn't affecting the slope. The barn isn't affecting the swales that they're talking about. The barn isn't affecting drainage. And certainly the apartment is not affecting any of that. So you're still going to have the same exact issues that you have right this moment, because the structure of a barn with an apartment in it is not going to do anything to change the topography of the general area. If anything, maybe the barn is going to block some flow coming off one of the hills. Or that water is going to go into the septic system, because as you know, septic systems have leach fields, and leach fields suck up water like you wouldn't believe it. The leach field in my house up in New Hampshire is brown all the time because the drainage is so great that all the water goes down through it. So it's almost like a barrier to runoff, not a creator of runoff. So I know that everybody has got lots of concerns, but unfortunately, most of their concerns is based on inaccurate information that they basically, and I can't expect them to, understand what a professionally managed barn, horse, and meadow situation is like. I can guarantee you, 1 year from now, you'll ask someone, what about that horse farm? And they'll say, I never think of it. You can't see the barn from the street. There's 4 horses, there's not 6 horses, there's not 8 horses. They're all retired, they don't run around, we don't ride them. They're here because they're old and they basically poop and eat. That's pretty much what they do. And by the way, I don't know what kind of horses Mr. Humphreys is familiar with, but our horses, we have to kick their ass in the morning to wake them up and get them up off the bottom of the stall because they're asleep, because they're old. We have one horse that doesn't curl up and sleep on the floor, and that's because he has bad knees and can't get up very well. But this business of horses wandering around during the night and kicking the stalls and doing all that kind of stuff, it's just not accurate. The manure problem is just not accurate. I think I see someplace else where they're talking about big trucks bringing in dirt, bringing in hay, and coming to take away the manure. These are not trailer trucks. These are box trucks. I don't know where the people are getting this information. Somebody is feeding them inaccurate, exaggerated, and basically wrong information about what a horse farm is about. I live in a neighborhood in New Hampshire which is filled with million-dollar houses, including mine. I have 4 horse barns within walking distance. When I put my house on the market just now, the real estate agent made sure, she said, you must put down on that listing that you're within the area of 4 horse barns because people like that. And it's good for us, the sale of the house. Now, maybe some of these people don't like horses. That's up to them. But these horses are not going to interfere with anybody's life. There's not going to be any runoff that damages the lake. There's more runoff coming off these people's yard. And yard fertilizer is high in nitrogen and phosphorus. That's going into the drain. That's going into the lake. That's going into the brook. The manure is not, because it's in a steel container, which gets taken away every other week. So if you have any other questions about what a properly managed, professionally managed barn is like, there's no noise. Horses are not as noisy as dogs. So I'm happy to answer any question you have. I mean, I could completely rip apart Mr. Humphrey's letter. It's just completely filled with inaccurate exaggerations, and it's mostly wrong. I mean, just the thing I mentioned about the diseases, the thing I mentioned about the manure. He's talking about all kinds of manure polluting the property and the grounds. I mean, give me a break. And the swale, by the way, is further down than where the other guy pointed out. And if it's a hole, then the water's going to drain into it, and it's not going to go uphill to somebody else. Can't hear you in that ear.
I'm saying to cool it.
Do it? Yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay. Any other questions for this gentleman?
Questions here, right here.
Yeah.
Check. Okay, any other questions of this gentleman here?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. Okay, sir, thank you.
I'm Kathy Bizzella, and I live at 10 Highview Terrace. I happen to love horses. I happen to love every animal. I lived in the Bronx Zoo for 20 years. My father ran a cooperative farm to show city kids how animals lived. He also assisted Dr. Charles Gandel, who was
Kathy, could you please address the board?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
who was an equine vet and also took care of large animals. When we had that little farm, we had one big Belgian mare that we bought from a glue factory for $60 so the kids could see a horse, and we had a donkey. We had to assure that the paddock, the pasture, was an acre plus for that horse to go in and graze. I looked at the size of your paddock, and for 4 horses to go into that paddock, to me seems unhealthy and unfair to the horse. I worry about the horse's health. You're a vet, and you know Mr. Boniello owns 6 horses on Mapac Avenue. He has 20 acres for those horses to graze on. Mr. Schwartz owns about 200 plus acres. He has champion horses that he shows all over the world. He takes good care of them. I'm worried about the health of your horses. You can go to someone's house and you can take care of their horse, but I have to tell you, we had some horses, not horses, but they were some type of cattle grazing over here on Elliford Farm back in the 80s. And we went to cruelty to animals, prevention for cruelty to animals, because they were gnawing down to the bare dirt. And they came in and had them remove those animals. The man used to rent it to him. It's Elephant Farm. So I agree with everything you say. You have clean barns, you have this, you have that. But I don't agree with the size of the property to have those 4 horses go out to that paddock and graze. You can rotate them, you can do whatever they want. They're gonna eat it down to the dirt because I've seen it done. And we've worked with all kinds of animals. I was raised with every kind of animal. I held every kind of animal. And we had the horse, we had sheep, we had pigs, we had everything. And I learned a lot about them. So I just worry about the health of the horses.
Okay, thank you. You know, here again, let's try to stay focused on the accessory apartment.
Well, you
and
let
its
him
everything.
speak about the horses, and I had to address that problem
Okay,
in
thank
my
you.
mind.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have the right of rebuttal, Mr. Chairman, to my scientific data.
Sir.
I really do think I have a right to rebut.
Sir, come on up and give your comments.
Okay? I defer to you, Mr. Potter. I
So
do
once
not...
again, please address all comments
Okay.
to the board, not to other members of the audience.
Mr. Chairman, I confess to ignorance. I do not personally know the people who wrote the report. That might be shocking to you, but I don't. Mr. Potter did not refute the results of the report. He just said he knew the person who wrote the report. That's point 1. There are 2 reports. There are numerous reports. I thought out of politeness to the board that I would only cite 1 or 2. I'll give you quotes. I don't think it's proper. I really don't think it's proper to quote things out of context. Let me give you a sentence. Approximately 80% of stabled horses show evidence of airway inflammation, and a recent survey performed by the veterinary school at Tufts shows that at least 25% of horses show overt signs of inflammatory airway disease, such as cough or exercise intolerance. Now, I confess I don't know the author. I plead ignorance, but I can only go from the report and the results of the report. Another report, that is from Tufts, also from Tufts. Why you put your mother in it? Barn personnel experience higher than average rates of respiratory systems. That's from 2009. The one I quoted you is from 2011. The estimated 4.6 million Americans involved in the equine industry may be at risk of developing respiratory symptoms due to poor air quality in horse barns, according to the study that was done in 2009 by Tufts. Since Mr. Potter, you've allowed Mr. Potter to bring up the topic of manure, it happens to be a topic I'm somewhat familiar with, and I don't want to take undue amount of time for you. But since he's brought it up and he questions the validity of the scientific findings of Cal Polytechnic and Purdue and numerous other universities, I can tell you quite frankly that 4 horses produce manure comparable to 39 Honda Accords every year. That might sound laughable to Mr. Potter. It's not laughable to us. 39 Honda Accords have to be disposed of. If you think it's possible to dispose of just manure from just a dumpster, it's fallacious. You're not going to go around in the horse corrals picking up little bits of manure that are frozen there in the winter, month after month. I'm sure Mr. Potter did not mean to question the authority of Tufts University, but numerous universities have attested to the fact that the manner of manure management is a serious issue. And for him to dismiss it, to easily pick it up, is, with due respect, fallacious. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Potter, I have a question for you. You mentioned that...
Please come up to the microphone just so we can hear you, sir.
You mentioned that your house up in New Hampshire is up for sale, and you had numerous barns. What did you do up there for a living? I just want to get a general feeling what you do. I mean, did you raise horses for a living?
No, I'm 78 years old. I'm retired.
Okay, what did you do prior to your retirement?
I was an executive with Xerox for 35 years.
All right. Thank you.
And by the way, I didn't say that they don't produce 50 pounds of manure. I said it's where they produce it is the issue, and they produce it in the stall, not in the field.
Now, I was just curious whether or not you were in the horse industry for a professional living. That's why I asked.
No, we do some consulting with people on barns and how to run them and all that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi,
Sir, if you
Board.
could- you give us your name and address.
Sure. Tom Bistany of 10 Anorak. So I live in the property directly adjacent to 6 Anorak, and I'm the owner of 10 Anorak. So I guess I've been in the property for about 2 years. I'm probably one of the newest members of the neighborhood. And I'm kind of just listening and collecting information for myself, and I'm listening to comments of yourself and comments of my neighbors. And there's kind of one thing that I think that I want to address, and it's really just the accessory apartment, because while I agree with all my neighbors on all other points, it's really not for me to discuss here. But there's one thing that I kind of got hung up on, you, Mr. Chairman. You made comment about if you were to operate a business at the property, that would be in violation. That would be of a concern of yours. Obviously, like, we're operating on some hypotheticals here. If that was to actually happen one day, and we don't have that information that's not operating yet, we can't make that determination. However, there's a lot of discussions that pertain directly to business and professional activities, which I think I'm just imploring you to have some foresight, because it's starting to just seem to me like the operation or the intention is to operate as a professional farm. I think the accessory apartment is to accompany that very fact. So as the accessory apartment goes, I mean, whether you're to adjourn it or to vote on it tonight, it seems like it's very much to accompany a business operating on the property. And Mr. Potter said it himself numerous times about operating professional farms. That's what I think they intend to do. And I know as the neighbor in that neighborhood, I wouldn't want a business operating directly next to me. I mean, 2 years ago, I had a choice of many places to live. I obviously wasn't looking for a place with the business running next door.
Keep in mind, as mentioned, the operating of a business in a residential district is a code violation, and that would be reported to code enforcement for proper follow-up.
Right. No, I understand that.
The board can never assure or guarantee what someone's going to do with a property in the future. I mean, but the applicant and the property...
Well, maybe it's more foresight for the actual owners to have themselves rather than the board. But
Right.
I think I just want to make one other comment, because it also pertains to the accessory apartment, and that's the character of the neighborhood. I think while horses may not be absolutely detrimental to the neighborhood, it's not as though we're putting a gas station at 6 Anorak. However, of the property size and what's allotted, being that the acreage, and like my neighbor said, I implore you to go actually visit the site, because it's a large lot, but most of it is essentially unusable. Most of it butts up to my property, and it's very steep slopes and hills and forests that really can't be used at all. However, though, the character of the neighborhood, because of the plans, will be so confined to such a small area. In my opinion, it'll essentially define the neighborhood. It will not only jeopardize the character, it will be the character. And I happen to think that it's something a little uncharacteristic of Somers today, and maybe a little more characteristic of Somers maybe many years ago, and certainly not Somers in the future. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Once again, just give us your name.
Kayla Choquette, 6 Anorak Drive. I just wanted to bring up the point, there already is an accessory apartment on Anorak Drive, so it's not a brand new thing to the community. I'm certainly not going to have a commercial facility out of the barn. My mom and I own 4 horses, and maybe want to have room for a pony for a kid down the road, and it's easier to have a stall on the first floor where you keep your hay, so you don't have to go up to the hay loft and throw down hay constantly. I think really from the road, the only difference is going to be the front yard is going to be fenced in. The concern for the horses, like we said, they're old. They all have small runoffs that are covered off of their stalls, so they can move around a little bit in inclement weather. And then in the good weather, that's why we have the 2 decently large paddocks for this area of the world. I wish I had the money for a giant estate in North Salem or Bedford that had acres and acres of fields, but it's just not realistic. I actually am affiliated with an equine hospital, so if I did need to hospitalize an animal, they go up to New England Equine Practice in Patterson. It's a 30,000 square foot facility. It's impractical to have a equine hospital in a 6-stall barn. I mean, it's literally our pets. There's 2 at my mom's house now and 2 at our rental in Brewster that I drive up there every day, and I clean the stalls, so I clean the paddocks every day too. I mean, it's just in practice, I know it's not difficult to keep everything clean and maintained well.
So as indicated, you're not going to run any business out of this property. That's
No.
not the...
No, my business is 99.8% going to barns or people's homes, because I do take care of some small dogs and cats. And the other 0.2% I would do at the hospital in Patterson, those horses that need surgery, or, I mean, getting a horse on an operating table involves a wench hanging from the ceiling and way more equipment than I could ever have in a small barn in my backyard. The concern with the look of the neighborhood, I mean, this is, the idea here at least is for this to be our forever home. We don't want it to be a mud pit. We want it to be beautiful. We moved here for the school system to be able to raise our kids in a nice small neighborhood. I have pets, I have animals where we're from. I moved out here 6 or 7 years ago after vet school. Where we're from, it's not as expensive to keep horses as it is here, so that necessitated them having to come home just to reduce cost of ownership. And I'm a sucker, and I don't sell them when they're hurt, so I just have them all, and they literally are just cripples that I feed and brush. And there's no plans for a riding ring. There's everything. I went to UMass Amherst before Tufts. It's an agricultural school. I have training in pasture management, so I'm imploring any of those strategies to maintain a beautiful, great character to the neighborhood. Before we bought the house, it was effectively abandoned for 13 years. People had broken in and stolen the copper pipes. So honestly, when we moved in, we thought we would be welcomed because we'd be, rejuvenating this outdated and abandoned home. There's plenty of articles out there about abandoned homes hurting property value. So we really had no idea this was going to be such a huge problem. And I wish my neighbors could know, I met with the town before we put an offer in. If I could have done this whole process or, met all of them, I would have. we had to buy the place, or else I guess maybe it wouldn't have sold, but we were nervous it would have. So, you know, I didn't come strutting in here like a cowboy, like I'm going to put my barn up and do whatever I want. I've really tried to do everything the right way, and I'm really, it's upsetting that everyone is so angry. I wish we could have done it differently.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I know it's been a long session. I appreciate everybody's time. And there is no ill
Could you give
feeling.
us, I'm sorry, could you give us
I'm
your name
sorry,
and
my
address?
name is Patricia Humphreys. I'm from 4 Anorak Drive. There's no ill feeling toward anyone, really. It's a matter of that we feel that our properties are in danger, that our lifestyle is in danger, that that we are, in a sense, being, for all that Mr. Trotter, I'm sorry, your name is Trotter, right? Potter, I apologize. That Mr. Potter had spoken about, you know, being surrounded by horse farms where he lives. This is not a horse farm area. This is simply a one-family residential area. That's all it is. It never was a farm. It was actually a gravel pit, which is why we have the steep slopes that we have. That's why we have stormwater issues. So I want to read my comment. Now, I applaud all my neighbors for their comments. They did a lot of research. They did a lot of hard work. They pointed out a lot of points about what's in the zoning code that is most probably appropriate and that should be looked at by the new building inspector. There's just a couple of things I want to say. I truly do not believe people should live above horse stalls. This is a 19th century idea. This is a romanticized idea. Much as people talk about on the board that people live above barns, this is not an optimal way of living. This is a very poor way of living. This is not healthy for the person, either mentally or physically. I'm quite sure that when people have horses bumping around, moving around, you know, can you sleep? Really? When it is necessary and people have no other option but to live above a horse barn? Okay, that's their option. When they have to work in the horse barn and they got to wake up in the morning and they are hired for that, well, that's the option too. But I do not consider it a valid place, a feasible place for anybody to live healthy and happy. It states quite clearly, and once again, 17069, Part B, subsection 2. No building used for human habitation shall be used to house domestic animals. Now, everybody's confused about what domestic animals mean, and I'll tell you something. This was written, God, who knows when. And maybe the terminology then was domestic animals. But maybe we can say domesticated animals, which means cows and mules and horses. So I think that is more than clear that you, as a board, have to say that there should not be an accessory apartment above a horse barn, because that's what it is. It isn't living in a space somewhere, not affected by anything. It's in an environment. The environment is a horse stable. Now, there is no hardship, as far as I know, for this applicant, that there is no reason why an accessory apartment cannot be in the soon-to-be renovated house that she owns. She's going to expand it. Oh, it's a beautiful plan. I love it. I want it. I want the sunroom. I love it. It's got space. It's got lots of space. It's going to maintain 5 bedrooms. 5 bedrooms. You mean you can't have someone living with you with 5 bedrooms, with a over 3,000 square foot house? It has a huge basement, gigantic. It's got a very large garage, expansive. It can hold, I believe, 6 vehicles. So I've seen it. So for that reason, I believe the accessory apartment should be denied. I don't believe there should be any strictures that you can impose that says you can't do this, you can't do that. I believe it's quite clear. It should not exist. As for animals, according to the Somers Code, Section 17011, accessory use, subpart B, 3D, there must be about 2.7 acres, 120,000 square feet, acres to house and exercise horses, the number of which must not exceed 2. Now, by that I am assuming, and I would assume anybody with any common sense would assume, they're talking about usable acres, not acres that go up into the sky, usable acres. They do not have 2.75 usable acres on 6 Anorak Drive. And even if we add 8 Anorak Drive, which is a subdivision right next to the house, which they also own, that's not going to matter. Even if they somehow make 1 acre out of that whole area, I'd be surprised. So I'm sorry. You cannot look at this as if it's just an accessory apartment in a house. It's not an accessory apartment in a house. It's an accessory apartment in a horse barn. And quite clearly, it should not be there. The code says so. And I think Mr. Riley should be the one to quite clearly point that out to you. There's also one other thing. And I'm sorry, but I've been reading, ever since this, I've learned a lot about horses. I've learned about what the Humane Society thinks. I've learned about everything. So even though we supposedly are only going to have 4 horses and put hay in the other stalls, maybe, maybe not, who knows? Things change. Nothing is ever written. Unless you put a stricture on that, saying you can only have so many horses, who's to say there's only going to be 4 horses there? But once again, they shouldn't have 4 horses. Shouldn't even have 1 horse. They do not have the acreage usable for horses. As for putting your horse in the front lawn, I'm sorry, I'd be scared that something would happen to the horse. I'd have to watch it myself, just to be sure someone didn't do something. Feed it inappropriately, some kid, or I won't say kid, okay, some malicious person would do something. I mean, I'm sorry, there's no protection, nothing. I know we like to all believe we live in a wonderful world, nothing ever happens. Oh, good, our crime statistics don't exist then. But we do live in this world, things happen. I do not believe this is an appropriate space for horses. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Michael Pasella, and I happen to be married to Kathy Pasella. We've been married for about 55 years now. It's a long time. And the reason why we get along so well, because she lives at 10 Highview, and I live at 2 Anorak. That's the truth. Am I right? Okay? Now, whatever is said here tonight is said. I do not want to add to that. But I've been a police officer for 47 years, 20 in the city, and 27 and a half years here in Somers. And he can vouch for me. That boy right there. That man. Okay? Now, my hero is another police officer. His name is Bonnie Fife. Does everybody know who Bonnie Fife is? Bonnie Fife is the deputy sheriff of Andy Taylor. Okay? I love that man. And his policy is, you gotta nip it in the bud. And that's what we're here for, to nip it in the bud. Okay? For the simple reason, like Mr. Chairman says, we're getting off track here now because now we were talking about the apartment. We're not talking about the horses or anything else. Steep slope, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the apartment. But where does it end? You give them the apartment, and it's in the law, you cannot give it to them. You give the apartment, what comes after that? A business. It's going to be a business. Traffic up and down, people dropping off horses to board them. There's a lot of money in that. So a lot of people not realize what's actually coming down. I'm always a money man, and I always look at either side. So that's all I have to say. And I love horses. Always had a dog. I love dogs. We have nothing against animals, but we live in a beautiful community and we want to keep it that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else wish to speak in regard to this application? Mr. Allen, I'd like you to come back up again just for a moment. Could you just clarify, I think you said that this accessory apartment, do we already have the approvals from the Board of Health in regard to the septic and things like that? Are they already in place?
That's my understanding. I believe we got it this week. If I misspoke, then it's imminent to be issued. Kelly, we got the permit. We've given it to the owner already. So the permit has been issued for a septic and a potential well on the property.
Right. And of course, if we were to approve an apartment, it would be conditioned
Well,
on
that would have to be
Board
to
of
the
Health.
building, before the building inspector can even issue a building permit, that would have
Right,
to be
it
in
would
place.
have to be in place, absolutely. Right, okay, I just wanted to understand where we stand in regard to that. Okay, thank you, sir.
And I was correct.
Okay.
Once in my life.
Okay. Does there anybody else wish to speak in regard to this application at this point in time? Does the applicant have any further comments or anything else you'd like to say at this point in time?
The only comment is we legally can't put the apartment in the basement because the steel beams that support the house bring the ceiling height too low.
As far as, you're talking about the basement of the existing home that you're in?
Yes. Yeah.
That very, well,
Yeah.
there are height requirements and there's egress requirements and size requirements, all kinds of things.
Yeah, so the back half of the house is below grade, the front is partially above, but the steel beams bring it too low for legal use.
Right, right, okay, all right, thank you. That's nice to know. Any other discussion the board wants to have in regard to this? We can make a decision if we want to vote on this tonight, if we want to adjourn it for further review.
I think so, Vic.
I don't know.
I think so.
You think it should be adjourned for further review?
Yeah.
What kind of further review are you thinking about?
Well, just like to know what's involved in putting that building up there and how much property is surrounding it, you know, that you haven't got, I imagine there's all rock, am I right? There's no solid ledge there?
Oh, the slope is.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yes. So, I mean, you know, there's less usage for, you know, a septic area and so forth there, and a well.
Yeah. You know, once again, I just don't know if that's part of what we should be looking at in regard, is that fair to the applicant to be looking at those issues with the special, I mean, Mr. Riley, give me your opinion on what where you think we're at here. You might need to speak into the microphone.
We are here, first of all, on with the board has to determine whether to close the public hearing, and it is a type 2 action. It's in the statute that an area variance and a special permit are type 2 actions.
That's always been my understanding, that is a type 2 action,
And that
yes.
is true.
Right. I don't think that's a debatable issue.
No, okay, so the issue is whether this apartment, which is a use permitted in this neighborhood, in this residential district, an accessory apartment is permitted. So that's the one issue, and then the second issue is whether a variance should be granted, an area variance, because of the years passage since 1992, and you use the same factors you would use forever. Does it change the character of the neighborhood? Is there any adverse impact from the apartment on...
From the apartment.
From the apartment. Does it, let's see, is it self-created? And if it is self-created, that cannot be a reason to deny it. So the same 5 factors would be utilized, but they have to revolve, as you've said 100 times, around the accessory apartment, which is otherwise permitted under the code. It's a use permitted. All of the other issues, you know, and I don't have the papers in front of me, go in front of the building inspector and the town engineer. I have heard on hearsay that the town engineer has pursued all of these issues, as you know, Tim Allen said. So there are these protections there, plus whether or not the horses are permitted is separate from whether or not the apartment is permitted. So trying to, you know, to include all these issues about the horses and manure, it just, you know, muddies up the water of what's in front of you. So you can, if you want, decide the case.
Right.
You know,
So, I mean, if we were to decide the case and approve the apartment, okay, that would be contingent upon or subject to, of course, a building permit being issued.
yes.
If there's any pending environmental issues, which I don't think there
Everything.
are.
The health department. all
But the
of
health
these-
department has to issue the permit for the septic and all that, so so that would also be another hurdle that they would have to cross.
Yes.
And if planning board for some reason needs to review that application, well, I don't know why they would, but that, once again, wouldn't stop us in making a determination tonight.
That's correct.
We are also able to condition, I mean, normally you can't really condition special exception use permits for accessory apartments, but in this case, because we have an area variance
Yes.
issue related to the time, we can put a condition as, for example, as I had mentioned before possibly, that you can't rent it to outside people. It has to be used for family use or someone, you know, taking care of the horses or something like that. But we could do that.
You can do it because it is
If
an
we
area
wanted to.
variance, yes. And I think the applicant agreed to that, but, you know, area variances run with the land. So they, you know, when you grant an area variance, you have to go beyond the people applying for it, because that variance will, as you know from the Porco matter, will be there for, you know, since 1962. This will be here in the year 3000. So when you give a condition, it should be related to the land, not necessarily the people who are making the application. That's my experience.
It'll go with the, right. And of course, a special exception use permit, they still have to come before us every 7 years for renewal on it.
Yes.
Right. And of course, they have to comply with whatever code requirements for.
And then the building inspector tells you whether or not they've been complying with the conditions of the code
Right.
and any special condition that you've made.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm hitting the relevant issues here. Okay.
Now, I do have actually multiple things here. One for Tim Allen and for my fellow board member. In the sense of where I walked on the property today, I noticed numerous areas where the proposed septic is. Now, did they do perk hole tests for the septic?
Correct, yes.
They did. So those were the areas where the proposed barn is and the house were done, where they've already been backfilled.
Just for the accessory apartment.
Yes.
It'll be separate, yeah.
Okay, so really to answer your question in the sense of doing a site walk for the proposed septic, you know, if this board will accept that I did physically see areas that were covered over, okay, based on the information we got from Tim that they were done. I'm just want to try to eliminate a little bit of a site walk if need be. Thank you.
And I'd like to add one other thing is, the chairman is mentioning the conditions. Those are self-imposed conditions. I mean, you asked them, they didn't really have to say they would acquiesce to that, but nonetheless, those are self-imposed conditions that we've agreed to, meaning that it would be family only or people on the property and not rented out.
Right. I have a feeling if we did approve it, or the board did approve it, those conditions would be
Exactly.
conditioned, that
Yes.
would be a condition of that permit. right?
Understood.
Right.
But just remember that, you know, acquiesce that very early in this process. And we appreciate the board in asking it and appreciate the applicant for saying that they're more than willing to do that.
Comments from other board members or any discussion we want to have? I'm looking for input here.
I don't think that I'm also ready to vote tonight.
You don't think you're ready?
We
You
got-
want to look at the documents, Sims?
Yes, whatever we got tonight, I'd like to get, you know, have to go through that, see what that's all about, and it's only fair.
Okay. Umberto, you feel the same way?
Mhm. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Can I just get a clarification again? I know you spoke about this earlier. The part of the code that's been referenced many times here tonight is that no building used for human habitation shall be used to house domestic animals. So can you just say that again?
It says what it says, but it is a preliminary statement for all of the districts, not just places where there's horses. And domestic animals in the section talks about everything from dogs and cats up to goats and pigs, and then it talks about horses and donkeys. So it says what it says, and the board is entitled to make a reasonable interpretation of what that means. I can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear on that statement. It says what it says, and it would imply that you can't have a dog or a cat in a house. Doesn't just apply to horses.
It does prohibit swine. There's another section.
Or no swine. But I can't, I'm sorry I can't make it any clearer. It states it in there. It does state it.
This is where I think the board has to make a good judgment.
You have to make a reasonable interpretation.
I mean, if I had never heard of anybody living above a horse barn, I would be very concerned about it. But, yeah, I know what happens,
Again, the building code also, and Tommy and I discussed this today, and I called the former building inspector in North Salem. We've done this many times in North Salem. He also moved to Lewisboro, Bruce Thompson, and we've done this many times. And I think they were going to talk about the relative code and the building code that allows this, to make sure that there's no problem with the building code in terms of how this has been done in the past. We've done this numerous times, as the chairman had stated. He's seen it a bunch of times. We've done it in Bedford. We've done it in, I can't recall we doing it in Somers before, but nonetheless, we've done it in surrounding towns up in Southeast. It's commonplace to have
But Timmy,
accessories
the
above
problem is that
horses.
those other towns, since I'm very familiar with North Salem, doesn't have that little section in it.
Right.
Well, not talking about domestic animals. I'm just saying, in terms of a building
No,
apparatus and what have you.
I don't think that's
I
even
think
an issue that
we're in clear ground.
Okay. Okay.
I think we should all take a look at that.
Please, no comments from the board, please, no comments. Yeah, so you think we should take, okay. I want to assess what other board members think, if we should adjourn this to next meeting and take a look at the property, look at more documents. That's what you would like?
Yes.
And Ronnie, you're the same feeling?
I feel so.
Yeah. Any other members, comments on whether you're prepared to vote tonight or you want to adjourn this for one more meeting?
Now, I will say, if the fellow board members would like to go for a site walk, I strongly feel they should, if that is the case, just to get the overall view of the entire piece of property, all right, other than just the concerns of the septic. So this way they get a general feel of the layout and what they plan on doing.
Yeah. Other comments, Melissa? What do you?
I'm prepared to vote tonight, but understanding that people want more time, I think if we are going to adjourn our decision, that it be adjourned just for our decision and not for open comment at the next meeting.
Yeah, I would probably definitely want to close the public hearing at this point in time. And, I mean, I think I'm of the same feeling you are, that I would be prepared to vote tonight, but if other board members are hesitant or would like to just have a little bit more time to think about it and read through the material, I always like everybody to try to come to the best decision. I don't know.
I'm prepared to vote, but I certainly would have no objection to continuing to review.
Right.
Same way.
So
Okay.
public comment closed.
Okay, so yeah, so I think what we'll do here is, do we have to vote on closing the public hearing? Okay.
Yes.
So do we have a motion as to closing the public hearing at this time?
So moved. Denise?
That was Bill.
Yes.
And a second?
A second.
Mr. Carpenetto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Gio?
Aye.
Mr. Harding?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Mr. Santoroni?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to close the public hearing on this, which means that the public discussion is ended at this point in time. The board is going to do a site visit. Maybe Denise, you could set up with the applicant times where we could reasonably just come to the property and take a look and see where, what we're interested in is where, you know, the building is going to be, so we could take a look at that.
And if anything gets submitted, it needs to be 10 days prior to the meeting. If there's anything new.
To me.
Right, to Denise, right. Everything goes to the Secretary of the Zoning Board. So this will give the board time to review it. So we're basically going to adjourn this matter till next month's meeting. We'll try to do the site, we'll do the site visit, and we'll also review the documents we have, put some more thought into this so we can come up to the best decision. Now, I want everybody to know here, too, that keep in mind, we're all residents of the town of Somers, too, you know? And we're trying to be fair to the applicant and fair to the neighbors. So we're trying to impartially look at this and come up with a good decision in accordance with the zoning law. That's what we're trying to do here. So I just want everybody aware of that. You know, so.
That's it.
All right, any other comments on this matter?
Hey, that lady in
When is the
blue.
next meeting?
Oh, we're always, almost always the third Tuesday of every month. That is November 20th, I have. November 20th, in this room at 7:30. Zoning Board normally meets, there are some exceptions, third Tuesday of every month.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, just I'll take a very quick question, but
It's really quick. Would it be possible for someone, one of the neighbors to go along with you guys?
No.
no, that's not really appropriate. Yeah, and remember, we're going on private property, you know, so, you know,
But we could point out our concern.
Well, that's, no.
yeah.
I think we have the material.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, you know, we have the material, we'll review the property. I think, you know, we're, you know, this board has made site visits before, we've looked at a lot of applications, so I think we know. Well, I mean, we're not gonna walk in anybody's private property without permission. Will all of us probably drive through the neighborhood? The answer is most likely yes. You know, I've been up in that neighborhood several times, so I know it fairly well, but I'm gonna drive it again, I wanna take a look at it. I'm sure everybody will, and we'll coordinate with the property owner to get their permission to come on. We're not just gonna come on at any time, we will give you notice, obviously. And if you could maybe just give us some times, because one other thing also is the board can't have more than 3 members at a time there, because it would be deemed a meeting if there's 4 members or more, and we can't have any meetings outside of the public.
Unless you noticed it. I
Right.
mean, that's up to the board.
But we normally just.
We've done that before. It's
Yeah.
up to you.
Yeah, no, we're not gonna notice a site visit. I don't-
Understood.
I don't think we'll do that. Okay, yes, in regard to what we're doing, right, yeah. Okay, yes.
Will you also please speak to Mr. Toomer and have him go over this whole plan for everything?
Well, the only thing before this board, once again, is the special exception use permit for an accessory apartment. In regard to the barn, the horses and how many horses and all that, that's Mr. Tuma's, you know, when he issues the permit, if the code allows it, he will issue it. If the code doesn't allow it, he won't. Remember, the building inspector too is not taking a side here. The building, you know, keep in mind, the building inspector is following the code, which is what he's required to do. You know, if you think he's made an error, which happens, you know, you can always appeal that to our board. So, you know, we're trying to get to a good decision, the right decision per the code. That's what we're trying to do.
See, it's that the last,
All right, ma'am, why don't you come up to the microphone just real quick then? But we really, I don't want to really go into, you know, we've closed the public hearing on this. I want to try to, you know, we could talk about procedure though.
all right. I'm only bringing up Mr. Toomer because he is the town supervisor,
It's Tuma.
yes.
Building inspector.
Whereas Ephraim isn't here anymore, so.
Ephraim retired.
Yes. So since Mr. Toomer is here now, I feel that he should be either looking at it, since he has to approve it after everything is said and done.
Oh, he will definitely review it. Before he issues a permit, he has to review it and get familiar with it. And remember, he's new to this application, so, you know, I'm not
Right.
going to put him on the spot and
Yes.
quiz him on this thing, because he has to go through it. It takes time to do these things.
Right, but I'm just concerned about before a decision is made for the accessory apartment, shouldn't he review everything else concerning the property, the barn, and everything?
The two things are mutually exclusive.
Okay, this is my question. It was the same question I had last time. I still do not understand, why are we discussing this accessory apartment? Because it'll become a moot point if the barn is never built.
Correct.
So,
Correct. If the barn is not built or cannot be built for whatever reason,
right.
the apartment is irrelevant.
So
That's
then
correct.
why are
So
we-
our decision, because the application has been made before us,
Yeah.
and if we do approve it, it would be conditioned upon the barn being there, obviously.
who passed from the town, from which board of the town passed it on to you? For
The building inspector passed it to us.
Okay, so the building
Any accessory apartments
Right.
have to be automatically referred to zoning board.
Okay.
It's a requirement.
No, I'm not saying
Yeah.
this is the wrong place. I'm just saying, why did he do this
That's automatic.
before anything else was built?
Keep in mind, we have over 100 probably accessory apartments, well
No,
over
no,
100 in the town of
That's not
Somers.
the problem.
Yeah.
It's common sense to me. You have to decide on an accessory apartment being built on a building that isn't even built yet, isn't even approved to be built yet. That's my point.
But the applicant has the right to make that application. They did so we act on it.
Yeah.
You would have the right to make an application to the building department as well, and
So this made
they
sense.
don't have to do it in order.
No,
Whether it makes sense or not, that's just the process.
The assumption is we're here that the barn is as of right, as we discussed all tonight. That's why we're here for the accessory apartment.
The applicant believes the barn is as of right, so they think it's just a matter of course before they're going to be allowed to do it.
No, I understand
I
that.
can't comment on that, but
No, I understand
that may very well be.
But the point is, what if it doesn't pass, for whatever reason?
Then our decision is moot.
I know.
So, ma'am, I don't want to go back and forth anymore. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right, listen, I'm going to end the discussion now. Okay, we've really had enough discussion on this. We've closed the public hearing, and we're going to, ma'am, anything that you would like to present, please present it to the zoning board secretary.
Now, there's one thing I would like to say about our current building inspector, our brand-new building inspector. Okay, I will say that he's been a resident of this town, as far as I know, all of his life, and he was the assistant building inspector for, 12, 13 years. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I have all the confidence in the world of our new building inspector. Chances are he's up to speed right now of where Ephraim left it off and up to this minute. So I have all the confidence in the world with Tommy Tuma.
Okay, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Last thing on the agenda we have this evening is approval of the September 11, 2018 minutes. If everybody has read them, we can approve by consensus. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay. I'm sorry, Tim, we're just wrapping up here. We're almost done. Any other issues we want to discuss? Any other concerns?
No.
Okay, I'm going to close this meeting for this evening. Please be aware, as indicated, our next meeting is November 20th, 2018, which is the third Tuesday in November. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Thank you.